Welcome, true believers, to a journey into the very heart of heroism itself. Tonight, we're going to explore not just the story of how a teenage boy became Spider-Man, but something deeper and more profound. We're going to walk together through the moments that taught Peter Parker what it truly means to be responsible, to understand the weight of power, and to carry the burden of knowing that our choices ripple outward in ways we can never fully predict. This is the story of Uncle Ben's final words, the birth of Spider-Man's responsibility, and the transformation of grief into purpose. So settle in, get comfortable, and let your mind drift back to a simpler time, to the quiet streets of Queens, to a modest house where love and wisdom were taught not through grand pronouncements, but through the steady example of a good man living a good life. There's no rush here. No need to hold on to every detail. Just let the story wash over you like a gentle tide, carrying you toward rest and peace. If this story has brought you comfort and helped you find rest, consider subscribing to our channel for more sleep documentaries that explore the heroes and stories that have shaped our imaginations and our understanding of what it means to be human. Our story begins not with a radioactive spider or a science demonstration gone wrong, but in the warm, safe confines of a small house on Ingram Street in the borough of Queens, New York. The year is 1962, and America is alive with the promise of the atomic age, the excitement of the space race, and the optimism that science and progress will solve the world's problems and usher in an era of prosperity and peace. But inside this modest home, with its worn furniture and carefully tended garden, a different kind of education is taking place. One that has nothing to do with atoms or rockets, and everything to do with the fundamental questions of how a person should live, what truly matters, and what we owe to one another simply by virtue of being human. The house itself tells a story if you know how to read it. The front porch with its slightly squeaking boards has been swept clean this morning, as it is every morning by Aunt May, who believes that caring for a home is a way of caring for the people who live in it. The small garden beside the walkway blooms with flowers that she has nurtured through hot summers and cold winters, her patience and attention rewarded with splashes of colour that brighten the whole neighbourhood. Inside, the living room is filled with the accumulated artefacts of a life lived simply but with great love. Photographs crowd every available surface, pictures of young Peter at various ages, always with that slightly serious expression that suggests a boy thinking deeper thoughts than most children his age. There are photos of Richard and Mary Parker, Peter's parents, their faces frozen in moments of happiness before the accident that took them from the world and left their young son in the care of Ben and May. The furniture is old but comfortable, chosen for durability and function rather than style. The kind of pieces that last for decades because they are well made and well cared for. The sofa where Peter does his homework each evening has cushions that have formed to the shapes of the people who sit there, creating familiar hollows that welcome family members home. The small dining table has witnessed thousands of meals, conversations that range from mundane discussions of school and work to deep explorations of ethics, responsibility, and the kind of person one should strive to become. Ben Parker sits in his favourite chair this evening, a sturdy armchair positioned near the window where the light is good for reading. He's not a tall man, nor particularly physically imposing, but there is a solidity to him, a quiet strength that has nothing to do with muscles and everything to do with character. His face is weathered by years of hard work and honest labour, lines etched around his eyes from smiling and around his mouth from speaking truths both gentle and difficult. He works various jobs to keep the household running, never complaining about the long hours or the modest pay, believing that providing for his family is not a burden, but a privilege, a way of expressing love through action rather than words. His hands, resting now on the arms of his chair, are the hands of a working man, calloused and strong, capable of fixing almost anything that breaks in the house, or helping neighbours with repairs they cannot afford to hire professionals to complete. Those same hands have guided Peter through countless small lessons, showing him how to throw a baseball, how to use tools safely, how to shake hands with a firm grip that conveys respect and confidence. May Parker moves about the kitchen with the practiced efficiency of someone who has prepared thousands of meals in this same space. Her movements economical and purposeful. She is small in stature but enormous in heart, a woman whose capacity for love and worry seems limitless. Her silver hair is pulled back in a neat bun, and she wears an apron over her simple dress, the uniform of her daily devotions to the care and feeding of her family. The smells emanating from the kitchen, roasting chicken and vegetables, fresh bread, and something sweet baking for dessert, speak of her belief that food is love made tangible. That gathering around a table to share a meal is one of the ways we create and strengthen the bonds that hold families together. She hums softly as she works, an old tune from her youth, the melody carrying through the house like an audible expression of contentment and peace. Upstairs in his small bedroom, 15-year-old Peter Benjamin Parker sits at his desk, supposedly working on his homework but actually lost in thought, staring out the window at the neighbourhood beyond. His room is a reflection of his curious mind and his scientific interests, filled with books on physics and chemistry, magazines about space exploration and atomic energy, and various small experiments and projects in different states of completion. The walls are decorated not with posters of athletes or movie stars, but with images of scientists and inventors, Einstein and Edison and Pasteur, men who use their intelligence to make the world a better place. Peter's desk is always cluttered with papers, formulas he's working through for the pure pleasure of problem solving, sketches of inventions he imagines building someday, and notes from his classes where he not only masters the required material but often goes far beyond what is expected, pursuing tangents and connections that interest him. His teachers at Midtown High School appreciate his obvious intelligence and dedication, but they worry sometimes about his social isolation, the way he seems to exist in a world apart from his classmates, too focused on ideas to notice the social dynamics swirling around him. At school, Peter occupies that invisible space reserved for students who excel academically, but struggle socially, the ones who are too smart to be dismissed entirely, but too awkward to be welcomed into the popular groups. He is the brain, the kid whose homework is worth copying, but whose company is not sought for its own sake. Flash Thompson, the school star athlete and social leader, has made Peter his favourite target for casual cruelty, not out of any particular malice, but simply because Peter represents an easy mark, someone who will not fight back and whose suffering provides entertainment for Flash's audience. The irony that will later emerge, that Flash will become Spider-Man's most vocal supporter and defender, never knowing that he is championing the very person he torments, adds a layer of complexity to their relationship that Peter will eventually come to find both amusing and sad. But on this particular evening, as the light fades outside his window and the smells of dinner drift up from the kitchen, Peter is thinking about none of these things. He's lost in a daydream, imagining futures where his intelligence is recognized and celebrated, where he makes discoveries that change the world, where people look at him with respect instead of dismissal or mockery. He does not know that his life is about to change in ways more dramatic than anything his imagination has conjured, that within days he will gain abilities beyond anything he has dreamed possible. That the quiet existence he sometimes finds frustrating will soon be replaced by challenges and responsibilities that will test every aspect of his character. The call to dinner brings Peter downstairs, his feet navigating the familiar path without conscious thought, a route he has travelled thousands of times. The dining room table is set simply but carefully, May's attention to the small rituals of family life evident in the straight silverware and neatly folded napkins. Ben is already seated, having washed up from his day's work, his face still showing the tiredness that comes from physical labour, but his eyes bright with interest as Peter takes his usual seat. The prayer that Ben offers before the meal is simple and heartfelt, giving thanks for the food they are about to eat, for the roof over their heads, for the love they share. and asking blessings on all those who are hungry or homeless or alone. It is the kind of prayer that reveals a man's values without preaching, that acknowledges privilege without guilt and expresses compassion without condescension. The conversation during dinner follows familiar patterns, May asking about Peter's day at school, Ben sharing a humorous anecdote from work, Peter describing a particularly interesting problem in his physics class. But underneath the ordinary surface of these exchanges runs a deeper current of connection and care. The knowledge that these three people are bound together not just by circumstance or obligation, but by genuine affection and mutual commitment to one another's well-being. Ben watches Peter as the boy talks about his schoolwork, noting the enthusiasm that lights up his face when he discusses scientific concepts, the quick intelligence that makes connections between seemingly unrelated ideas, the depth of curiosity that drives him to understand not just how things work, but why they work that way. He sees in his nephew the potential for genuine greatness, not the greatness of fame or fortune necessarily, but the greatness of a mind fully employed in service of understanding and helping others. But Ben also sees the loneliness, the way Peter's intelligence has isolated him from his peers, the hunger for connection and belonging that lurks beneath the surface of his academic achievements. He worries about his nephew, not because Peter is troubled or troublesome, but because the world can be cruel to those who are different, and intelligence without wisdom or power without moral guidance can lead to outcomes that harm rather than help. It is this worry, this deep concern for the kind of man Peter will become, that prompts the conversation that will change everything, the words that will echo through Peter's consciousness for the rest of his life and shape every decision he makes as Spider-Man. The dishes are cleared, dessert is served and eaten, and as the evening settles into its comfortable routine, Ben suggests that he and Peter take a walk before bedtime, a chance to stretch their legs and enjoy the mild spring evening. May smiles her approval, knowing that these walks are opportunities for the kind of man-to-man conversations that are sometimes easier in motion than sitting face to face. The neighbourhood is quiet as they set out, the streetlights creating pools of yellow illumination along the sidewalk, the houses they pass glowing with the warm light of families settling in for the night. Ben walks with his hands in his pockets, his pace unhurried, comfortable with silence but ready to speak when the moment feels right. Peter walks beside him, content to be in his uncle's company, sensing that this walk has a purpose beyond mere exercise, but patient enough to let Ben find his own way to whatever he wants to say. They walk several blocks before Ben begins to speak, his voice quiet and thoughtful, the tone of someone who has been considering his words carefully and wants to express something important without making it feel like a lecture or a sermon. He talks about power, not the kind that comes from political office or great wealth, but the power that each person possesses simply by virtue of being alive and capable of making choices that affect others. He speaks of intelligence as a form of power, the ability to understand things that others cannot, to solve problems, to create and invent, to see possibilities that are invisible to less educated or less capable minds. He acknowledges that Peter has been given gifts, a brilliant mind, a capacity for learning, a curiosity that drives him toward understanding, and he suggests that these gifts are not just for Peter's benefit, that they come with implications and obligations that extend beyond personal satisfaction or individual achievement. The conversation meanders, as these talks between uncle and nephew often do, touching on various topics and examples, stories from Ben's own life, observations about people they both know, reflections on current events and historical patterns. But gradually, Ben circles back to the central theme he wants to explore, the relationship between power and responsibility, between capability and obligation, between what we can do and what we should do. He does not preach or lecture, does not demand or insist, but rather invites Peter to consider questions that have no easy answers, but whose consideration is essential to becoming a good person. What do we owe to others? Ben asks. not as a rhetorical question, but as a genuine invitation to thought and discussion. Do our abilities create obligations? If we can help someone and choose not to, what does that make us? Is it enough to simply not do harm, or are we called to actively do good? These are not new questions for Peter, who has thought about ethics and morality in abstract philosophical terms, but hearing them from Ben, spoken with quiet conviction in the familiar streets of their neighbourhood, gives them a weight and immediacy that transforms them from intellectual puzzles into pressing personal concerns. Ben talks about the small choices he makes every day, the decision to help a neighbour with a repair even when he is tired from work, the choice to be patient with a difficult customer, the commitment to treat everyone with respect regardless of their station or circumstances. He does not present these actions as extraordinary or heroic, but simply as the baseline of decent human behaviour, the minimum standard for someone who understands that we are all connected, that our actions ripple outward in ways we cannot fully anticipate, that the world becomes better or worse based on the accumulated choices of billions of individuals deciding moment by moment what kind of people they will be. As they turn back toward home, walking through streets that have witnessed this same path countless times, Ben's tone becomes more serious, more direct. He places a hand on Peter's shoulder, the weight of it both physical and metaphorical, a gesture of affection and emphasis. The words he speaks now are the ones that will define Peter's life, that will echo through his consciousness during moments of crisis and decision, that will become the foundation of his heroic identity and the measuring stick against which he evaluates every choice he makes. With great power comes great responsibility, Ben says, and the simplicity of the statement belies its profound implications. It is not a threat or a burden in Ben's telling, but rather a recognition of reality, an acknowledgement of the way the universe works, the fundamental truth that ability creates obligation, that those who can help those in need are called to do so not by external authority, but by the simple fact of their capability. The power to help creates the responsibility to help, and to refuse that responsibility, to hoard one's gifts for purely selfish purposes, is to betray the best part of one's humanity. Peter nods, only half understanding the full weight of what his uncle is saying, seeing it as good advice certainly, as wisdom worth considering, but not yet grasping how these words will become the organising principle of his entire adult life. He cannot know, walking beside his uncle through the safe, familiar streets of Queens, that within days he will be tested on this lesson in ways he cannot imagine. That his failure to live up to this standard will cost him the very man who is teaching it to him. That Uncle Ben's death will become the price of Peter's education in responsibility, the tuition paid in blood and grief for understanding what these words truly mean. They return home to find May waiting with mugs of hot cocoa, a small ritual she has maintained since Peter was very young. A way of marking the end of the day and gathering the family together one last time before sleep. They sit in the living room, the three of them, sipping the sweet warm drink and sharing comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts, but bound together by love and the accumulated history of years of these same evenings, these same small rituals that create the texture of a life. When Peter finally climbs the stairs to his room and prepares for bed, he thinks briefly about Uncle Ben's words, about power and responsibility, about the obligations that come with capability. But he is 15 years old, and his own power still seems distant and theoretical, something to consider in abstract terms rather than immediate personal application. He falls asleep easily, dreamlessly, having no idea that his comfortable world is about to be shattered, that the lessons his uncle has been teaching him are about to be tested in the most terrible way possible, that the loving guidance he has always taken for granted will soon be taken away, leaving him only with the words, the wisdom, and the crushing weight of understanding that comes too late to save the man he loves. The science demonstration that will change Peter Parker's life forever takes place on a Tuesday afternoon in early November, just 3 days after his evening walk with Uncle Ben, though the connection between these two events will not become clear until much later, when tragedy forces understanding upon him with terrible clarity. The field trip to the science exhibition at General Techtronics Research Center is one of those educational opportunities that excite teachers more than students, most of whom view it as a pleasant escape from regular classes rather than a genuine learning experience. The bus ride from Midtown High School to the research facility is filled with the usual chaos of teenage energy barely contained. Students chattering and laughing, passing notes, and generally paying little attention to their chaperone's attempts to impose order and decorum. Peter sits alone near the front of the bus, as he usually does on these excursions, his nose buried in a book about atomic physics that is several years ahead of what his class is studying. He's excited about the demonstration in a way that his classmates are not, genuinely interested in seeing practical applications of the theoretical concepts he's been reading about, curious about how real scientists work and what kind of equipment they use and what discoveries might be just over the horizon. His isolation from his peers is so complete that he barely notices it anymore, has learned to find satisfaction in his own thoughts and interests rather than seeking the approval or companionship of people who do not share his passions or appreciate his gifts. Flash Thompson sits near the back of the bus, surrounded as always by his admirers and followers, holding court with stories of athletic triumphs and plans for weekend parties that Peter will never be invited to attend. At one point, Flash notices Peter sitting alone and makes a comment loud enough for several rows to hear. Something mocking about Parker probably understanding the science demonstration better than the scientists, delivered in a tone that makes it clear this is not a compliment but an insult, a way of pointing out Peter's difference and social inadequacy. The laughter that follows is automatic and cruel, the kind of casual meanness that teenagers inflict on one another without really thinking about the harm they cause, without understanding that these small wounds accumulate over time and shape the people their victims become. Peter hears the comment and the laughter, feels the familiar sting of humiliation and exclusion, but he's learned to armour himself against these attacks, to retreat into his own mind where Flash's opinion holds no weight, and the approval of people who mock intelligence seems less important than the satisfaction of understanding complex ideas. He turns a page in his book and continues reading, giving no outward sign that the comment has affected him, though somewhere deep inside a small voice whispers that someday, somehow, he will prove himself to be more than the insignificant nobody that his classmates see when they bother to look at him at all. The research facility is an impressive complex of modern buildings, all glass and steel and clean lines, representing the cutting edge of scientific progress in this era of atomic optimism and technological faith. The students file out of the bus and are herded into a large lecture hall where the demonstration will take place, their movements shepherded by teachers who remind them to behave appropriately and represent their school well. The hall itself is designed like a small amphitheatre, with rows of seats descending toward a central demonstration area equipped with various pieces of scientific equipment, monitors, and safety barriers that hint at the powerful forces that will be on display. The scientist leading the demonstration is Dr. Curtis Connors, a name that will become significant in Peter's future, though neither of them knows it yet. A brilliant researcher who has dedicated his career to understanding how radiation affects living tissue and whether controlled exposure might be used to treat diseases or enhance natural healing processes. Dr. Connors is a passionate educator as well as a researcher, and he genuinely enjoys these opportunities to share his work with young people, to inspire the next generation of scientists, to show them that the abstract formulas they study in textbooks have real-world applications that can change lives and advance human knowledge. He begins his presentation with an overview of atomic theory, explaining in terms accessible to high school students how radiation works, what it can do to living cells, and why scientists must be so careful when working with radioactive materials. His enthusiasm is genuine and infectious, and even some of the less scientifically inclined students find themselves paying attention, drawn in by his obvious passion for his subject and his skill at making complex ideas understandable. Peter leans forward in his seat, absorbing every word, occasionally jotting notes in the margin of his textbook. His mind racing ahead to questions and implications that the presentation touches on but does not fully explore. The demonstration itself involves several different experiments showcasing the effects of controlled radiation exposure on various materials and organisms. There are metals that change their properties under radioactive bombardment. Their molecular structure altered in ways that give them new characteristics and potential applications. There are plants growing in specially designed chambers exposed to precise doses of radiation that have accelerated their growth and produced mutations that might lead to hardier crops or new varieties with useful traits. And there, in a small glass enclosure near the centre of the demonstration area, is a spider, no larger than a pencil eraser, that has been exposed to a carefully calibrated dose of radioactive rays as part of an experiment to understand how arthropods respond to radiation at the cellular level. The spider is not remarkable to look at, just an ordinary specimen of a common species, chosen for the experiment because spiders are resilient creatures whose relatively simple biology makes them good subjects for this kind of research. But the radiation has changed it in ways that are not immediately visible, altering its DNA, affecting its cellular structure, creating mutations that the scientists have documented but do not fully understand. The creature glows faintly with an eerie luminescence, a visible sign of the radioactive isotopes that have been incorporated into its tissues, making it both beautiful and slightly unsettling to observe. Dr. Connors explains the spider experiment in detail, describing the dosage of radiation used, the observed changes in the creature's behavior and physiology, and the potential implications for understanding how living organisms adapt to environmental stressors. He emphasizes the safety protocols that have been implemented, the shielding that protects observers from exposure, the careful monitoring that ensures no radioactive material escapes the controlled environment. The students listen with varying degrees of attention, some genuinely interested, others merely polite, a few already thinking about what they will do when this tedious educational experience finally ends and they are released back into their normal lives. What happens next occurs so quickly and quietly that no one notices it at the time. A small accident that will have enormous consequences, a moment of carelessness, or perhaps just bad luck that sets in motion a chain of events that will affect not just Peter Parker, but countless other lives in ways both wonderful and terrible. The spider's enclosure, not properly secured by a technician who was rushing to complete his setup before the demonstration began, has a small gap in its seal, just large enough for the tiny creature to squeeze through when it becomes agitated by the noise and activity surrounding its container. The spider begins to lower itself on a strand of web so thin as to be almost invisible, descending silently through the air while Dr. Connors continues his explanation, and the students watch other parts of the demonstration. It drifts downward with the randomness of a leaf falling from a tree. No consciousness guiding its path, no intention behind its movement. Just a small creature following its instincts and responding to stimuli in the simple way that spiders do. The fact that it descends toward Peter Parker rather than toward any of the dozens of other students in the hall is pure chance, an accident of positioning and air currents and the mysterious workings of probability that sometimes align to create moments of profound significance from seemingly random events. Peter, leaning forward to get a better view of one of the experiments, does not notice the spider descending toward him through the air above his head. He is focused entirely on Dr. Connors' explanation of radioactive isotopes, his mind engaged with questions about half-lives and cellular mutation, completely unaware that his life is about to change in the most dramatic and irreversible way possible. The spider lands on the back of his right hand so lightly that at first he does not even feel it, the creature's weight negligible, its presence undetectable until its survival instinct kicks in and it does what spiders do when they feel threatened or trapped. The bite, when it comes, is sharp and sudden, a small sting that causes Peter to jerk his hand reflexively, and look down to see what has caused this unexpected pain. He sees the spider clinging to his skin, glowing faintly with that eerie radioactive luminescence, and he brushes it away with his other hand, watching as it falls to the floor and curls up, apparently dying from the effort of delivering its venom, or perhaps simply reaching the end of its brief, altered life. The bite mark on Peter's hand is small, just 2 tiny puncture wounds, but it throbs with a heat that seems disproportionate to the size of the injury. A warmth that spreads up his arm and begins to radiate through his entire body with alarming speed. Peter looks around to see if anyone has noticed what just happened, if any of his classmates or teachers saw the spider bite him, but everyone's attention is still focused on the demonstration, on Dr. Connors and his explanations and the various experiments on display. The student sitting next to Peter is leaning in the opposite direction, watching something on the far side of the demonstration area, completely unaware of the drama unfolding beside him. For a moment, Peter considers raising his hand and reporting the incident, explaining that he has been bitten by one of the radioactive spiders and asking what he should do about it. But embarrassment and uncertainty hold him back. He does not want to cause a disruption, does not want to draw attention to himself and potentially get in trouble for somehow interfering with the demonstration, does not want to give Flash Thompson and the others another opportunity to mock him for being clumsy or careless, or whatever explanation they would devise for how he managed to get bitten by a spider that was supposed to be safely contained. So he says nothing, just watches as the tiny glowing spider stops moving on the floor near his feet, apparently dead, its role in his transformation complete. Its brief existence having served a purpose that neither Peter nor the spider could have anticipated or understood. The symptoms begin almost immediately, though Peter does not recognize them for what they are, attributing his sudden discomfort to anxiety, or perhaps the beginning of a flu. His vision blurs slightly, colours seeming to intensify and shift. Details becoming sharper in some areas and softer in others as his eyes adjust to changes he cannot comprehend. His hearing becomes more acute, picking up conversations from across the room, the hum of electrical equipment, the rustle of papers and clothing, sounds that should be background noise but which now intrude on his consciousness with uncomfortable clarity. His skin feels hypersensitive, the fabric of his clothing scratching and irritating, the air in the room seeming to move across his exposed skin like a tangible presence. The nausea comes next, a rolling discomfort in his stomach that makes him grateful he ate only a light lunch, though even that small meal now threatens to make an unwelcome reappearance. Sweat breaks out on his forehead despite the comfortable temperature of the lecture hall, and he feels alternately too hot and too cold. His body's thermoregulation system apparently malfunctioning in response to whatever the spider's venom has introduced into his bloodstream. The radioactive isotopes carried in the creature's bite are already beginning their work, rewriting Peter's DNA, fundamentally altering his cellular structure, initiating changes that will transform him from an ordinary human being into something unprecedented, something that exists at the intersection of human and arachnid, possessing abilities that should be impossible, but which will become as natural to him as breathing. Peter tries to focus on the demonstration, tries to ignore the increasingly alarming signals his body is sending, but concentration becomes difficult, and then impossible as the symptoms intensify. His heart races, pounding so hard he can hear it in his ears, a rhythmic thunder that drowns out Dr. Connor's voice, and makes him worry that something is seriously wrong. That perhaps the spider's bite has introduced a toxin that will require medical attention. He considers again speaking up, reporting what has happened, seeking help, but pride and embarrassment and a teenage boy's stubborn refusal to admit vulnerability keep him silent and suffering in his seat. The remainder of the demonstration passes in a blur of discomfort and confusion. Peter barely aware of what is being shown or explained, all his attention focused inward on the strange and frightening things happening to his body. When Dr. Connors finally concludes his presentation and thanks the students for their attention, inviting questions that Peter is in no condition to ask. The relief Peter feels at knowing they will soon leave this place is overwhelming. He stands with the others when they are dismissed, his legs unsteady beneath him, and he joins the general movement toward the exit, trying to appear normal even though he feels anything but, trying not to stagger or stumble or otherwise call attention to his deteriorating condition. The bus ride back to school is an exercise in endurance. Peter slumped in his seat with his eyes closed, pretending to sleep but actually fighting wave after wave of nausea and dizziness, his body temperature fluctuating wildly, his senses overwhelmed by input they are not equipped to process properly. The other students ignore him, as they usually do, which for once is a blessing rather than a source of loneliness or hurt feelings. Flash Thompson makes another mocking comment as he walks past Peter's seat. Something about Parker sleeping through an educational opportunity. But Peter does not even register the insult, too focused on simply holding himself together until he can get home and collapse in the privacy of his own room. When the bus finally returns to Midtown High School and the students are released, Peter seriously considers asking to see the school nurse, reporting that he is not feeling well and needs to go home early. But the thought of having to explain what happened, of potentially revealing that he was bitten by a radioactive spider, and having to deal with the fuss and attention that would inevitably follow such a revelation deters him from seeking help. Instead, he collects his belongings from his locker, moving slowly and carefully, and begins the walk home. A journey that normally takes about 20 minutes, but which today seems to stretch on endlessly, each block an achievement, each step requiring conscious effort and determination. The familiar streets of Queens have never looked stranger to Peter, his altered perception making everything seem both hyper-real and slightly dreamlike. Colours too vivid, sounds too loud. The ordinary activities of neighbours and shopkeepers taking on an almost surreal quality. He can hear conversations from impossible distances, can see details on buildings across the street that should be too far away to make out clearly, can sense vibrations through the sidewalk that speak of traffic and movement blocks away. His body feels like it belongs to someone else, responding to his commands but in ways that are subtly wrong, his movements slightly too quick. His steps landing with more force than he intends, his hands gripping things with strength that surprises him. By the time Peter reaches the house on Ingram Street, he is barely holding himself upright, his vision swimming, his stomach churning, every cell in his body screaming that something fundamental has changed, that he is no longer the person he was this morning when he left for school. He fumbles with the front door, his hands shaking, and practically falls into the house when the door finally opens. Aunt May, hearing him enter, calls out a greeting from the kitchen, asking how his day was and whether he is ready for an after-school snack, her voice carrying the warmth and concern that have been constants throughout his life. Peter manages to call back that he's not feeling well, that he thinks he might be coming down with something, and he needs to lie down for a while. The worry in May's voice is immediate and profound as she emerges from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, her face creasing with concern as she takes in Peter's pale, sweating appearance. She places a cool hand on his forehead, checking for fever, and makes sympathetic sounds when she feels the heat radiating from his skin. She helps him up the stairs to his room, her small frame surprisingly strong as she supports his weight, and she settles him into bed with the practiced efficiency of someone who has nursed sick children through countless illnesses. She brings him aspirin and water, a cool cloth for his forehead, and promises to check on him regularly, instructing him to call out if he needs anything or if his symptoms get worse. Peter assures her that he will be fine, that he just needs to rest, and he watches gratefully as she tucks the blanket around him with tender care before leaving the room, pulling the door most of the way closed but leaving it slightly ajar so she can hear if he calls. The moment she's gone, Peter closes his eyes and surrenders to the transformation that is happening within him, his body no longer his to control, given over entirely to the strange process initiated by the radioactive spider's bite. The hours that follow are a fever dream of sensation and change, Peter's consciousness drifting in and out of awareness as his body rewrites itself at the most fundamental level. He dreams of webs and walls, of crawling and climbing in ways that human beings are not meant to move, of seeing the world from impossible angles and perspectives, of strength that could shatter concrete and speed that could outrun cars. The dreams are vivid and strange and somehow prophetic. His unconscious mind processing the changes his body is undergoing and trying to make sense of what he is becoming through the symbolic language of sleep. When Uncle Ben comes home from work that evening and learns that Peter is sick, he climbs the stairs quietly and looks in on his nephew, his face gentle with concern as he observes the boy tossing restlessly in bed, muttering in his sleep, clearly in the grip of some powerful illness. Ben does not disturb him. Just watches for a moment with the worried love of a parent, then retreats downstairs to confer with May about whether they should call a doctor if Peter is not better by morning. Their voices drift up to Peter's room, soft murmurs of concern and planning, the sound of two people who love him working together to care for him, to protect him, to ensure his well-being with the same devoted attention they have given him since his parents died, and he became their responsibility and their joy. Through the night, Peter's transformation continues, his body burning through the changes with a speed that would be medically impossible if medical science had any framework for understanding what is actually happening to him. The spider's radioactive venom, carrying genetic material altered by radiation into something entirely new, is incorporating itself into Peter's DNA, creating a hybrid organism that is still human but also something more. Something that possesses capabilities drawn from the arachnid world, but expressed through a human form and filtered through human consciousness. The proportional strength of a spider, which allows the tiny creature to lift many times its own weight, becomes in Peter's much larger body a super strength that will let him lift cars and stop trains. The spider's ability to cling to surfaces through microscopic hairs and chemical adhesion becomes in Peter the power to stick to walls and ceilings as easily as walking on the floor. The spider's acute sensitivity to vibrations and its near 360-degree vision become in Peter an extrasensory perception that will warn him of dangers before they become apparent to normal human senses. By the time the sun rises on the following morning, Wednesday, November the 7th, 1962, Peter Parker has been fundamentally transformed at a biological level, though he does not yet understand the full extent of what has happened to him. He wakes feeling different, the nausea and fever gone, replaced by a sense of vitality and power that is completely unlike anything he has ever experienced before. His body feels light and strong and capable, as if he could leap out of bed and run for miles without getting tired, as if the normal limitations of human physiology no longer apply to him. He sits up slowly, testing his body's responses, and finds that he feels better than fine. He feels amazing, energized and powerful, and somehow more alive than he has ever been. The first indication that something truly extraordinary has happened comes when Peter tries to put on his glasses, the thick lenses he has worn since childhood to correct his poor eyesight. The world is already in perfect focus, sharp and clear, every detail visible with a precision that makes his glasses not just unnecessary but actually uncomfortable to wear. He takes them off and looks around his room, seeing everything with a clarity that should require corrective lenses, understanding in that moment that his vision has somehow been perfected, that whatever made him sick yesterday has also healed his eyesight, or perhaps replaced it with something better than normal human vision. He stands and stretches, marveling at how good his body feels, how responsive and strong, and that is when the second discovery occurs. His hand, reaching out to steady himself against the wall, sticks to the surface not through any conscious effort, but apparently through some property of his skin itself. At first he thinks it is just sweat or some other temporary adhesion, but when he tries to pull his hand away, he finds that it is genuinely stuck. attached to the wall with a grip so strong that pulling free requires conscious effort and mental focus, as if his hands have developed the ability to adhere to surfaces through some act of will. Peter experiments cautiously, placing his other hand against the wall and finding that it too sticks with that same firm grip. He lifts one foot and presses it against the wall, and it adheres as well, supporting his weight as if gravity has become optional. As if the normal rules about which surfaces human beings can stand on have been suspended in his case. With growing excitement and amazement and more than a little fear, Peter realizes that he can climb the wall of his bedroom, can literally walk up the vertical surface as easily as walking across the floor, his hands and feet sticking and releasing in response to his unconscious commands. His body moving with a grace and confidence that feels both completely natural and utterly impossible. He climbs halfway up the wall before caution overcomes his excitement, and he carefully makes his way back down to the floor, his heart pounding not from exertion but from the implications of what he has just discovered about himself. Something has happened to him, something connected to yesterday's field trip and the spider bite that he has almost forgotten in the drama of his illness. And whatever it is has given him abilities that should exist only in the realm of science fiction or superhero comic books. The thought that crosses his mind in that moment, the first stirring of the idea that will eventually define his life, is both thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. What else can he do, he wonders? What other changes has the spider's bite wrought in his body? What other impossible things has he become capable of that he has not yet discovered? The urge to test himself, to push his new abilities to their limits and find out exactly what he has become, wars with the need for caution and secrecy, the understanding that revealing these changes to anyone, even to Aunt May and Uncle Ben, would raise questions he cannot answer and create complications he is not prepared to deal with. So he resolves to keep his transformation secret, at least for now, at least until he understands better what has happened to him and what he should do about it. And he begins the careful process of learning to control his new abilities while maintaining the appearance of being the same Peter Parker he has always been. The days that follow Peter's transformation are a strange and exhilarating mixture of discovery and deception as he learns the full extent of his new abilities while maintaining the careful facade of normalcy that prevents Aunt May and Uncle Ben from realizing that anything has changed. The process of exploration begins slowly, cautiously, in the privacy of his bedroom during the early morning hours before the rest of the household wakes. Peter testing the limits of his strength by lifting furniture that should require two people to move, discovering that he can hoist his heavy wooden desk with one hand as easily as picking up a textbook, the weight that would strain the muscles of a grown man feeling almost negligible in his transformed grip. The strength is astonishing and somewhat frightening in its magnitude, raising questions about exactly how strong he has become and whether there are limits to what his enhanced muscles can accomplish. He finds that he can bend the metal frame of his bed with his bare hands, can crush a baseball to pulp with a casual squeeze, can punch holes in his bedroom wall with what feels like minimal effort, though he quickly stops that particular experiment when he realizes that explaining the damage to Aunt May would be impossible. The most remarkable aspect of his new strength is not its raw power, but the control that comes with it, the instinctive understanding of exactly how much force to apply to different tasks, the ability to pick up fragile objects without breaking them, even though his grip could easily shatter them to pieces. This fine motor control, this unconscious regulation of his enhanced strength, suggests that whatever has happened to him has affected not just his muscles, but also his nervous system, his brain, his entire proprioceptive sense of how his body exists in space and interacts with the physical world. He can crack an egg with the same gentle precision he used before his transformation, can write with a pencil without snapping it in half, can shake someone's hand without crushing their fingers, all because some part of his enhanced physiology automatically adjusts his strength to match the requirements of each situation. It is this control, more than the raw power itself, that will eventually make him an effective hero rather than a dangerous accident waiting to happen. The wall-crawling ability proves equally fascinating and far more versatile than Peter initially imagined, as he discovers that he can adhere to any surface regardless of its composition or angle. His hands and feet sticking to painted walls, bare wood, metal, glass. Even smooth surfaces that offer no natural grip or texture for normal climbing. The adhesion seems to work through some combination of molecular attraction and perhaps tiny microscopic structures on his skin that act like the setae on a spider's legs, creating van der Waals forces strong enough to support his entire body weight, while still allowing him to release his grip at will through some unconscious mental command. He practices climbing the walls of his bedroom until the movement becomes natural and automatic, until he can ascend to the ceiling and hang there upside down, without even thinking about the impossibility of what he is doing, his inner ear apparently having adjusted to his new abilities so completely that being inverted feels no stranger than standing upright. The ceiling becomes another floor to him, a surface he can walk across as easily as the ground below, and the corners where walls meet ceiling become highways he can navigate with spider-like ease, moving through three-dimensional space in ways that redefine his understanding of how human beings can move through the world. The discovery of his enhanced reflexes comes not through deliberate testing but through accident. When Peter knocks a glass of water off his nightstand and catches it before it has fallen more than a few inches, his hand moving with a speed that startles him, snatching the glass from the air before his conscious mind has even registered that it is falling. The incident prompts a series of experiments that reveal reaction times far beyond human norms, his body responding to stimuli with a quickness that borders on precognition, moving to catch or avoid things almost before they happen, as if some part of his enhanced nervous system can detect and respond to dangers with superhuman speed. He drops objects repeatedly, and catches them at the last possible moment, tosses balls against the wall, and plucks them from the air with casual ease, experiments with increasingly complex sequences of movement that require split-second timing and perfect coordination. His body seems to know what to do before his mind consciously directs it, anticipating the trajectory of falling objects, calculating angles and velocities with unconscious precision, moving with a fluid grace that makes even complicated acrobatic maneuvers feel natural and effortless. The enhancement extends to his overall agility and balance, his body able to twist and turn in mid-air, to land from heights that would injure a normal person, to move with a kind of coordination that takes gymnasts years to develop, but which has been given to him as a gift from the radioactive spider's transformative bite. But the most remarkable and mysterious of Peter's new abilities reveals itself gradually over those first few days. A sixth sense that defies easy explanation or scientific understanding. A strange tingling awareness that alerts him to dangers before they become apparent to his normal senses. The first time he experiences this spider sense, as he will come to call it, is when Aunt May approaches his bedroom door to check on him during one of his early morning practice sessions. Before her hand touches the doorknob, before he hears any sound of her approach, Peter feels a sudden tingling at the base of his skull, an urgent warning that someone is about to enter his room, giving him just enough time to drop from the ceiling where he has been hanging and assume a normal position sitting at his desk, before May opens the door to ask if he would like some breakfast. The incident prompts careful observation and testing of this new sense, Peter paying attention to the tingles and warnings that occur throughout his day, learning to distinguish between different levels and types of alert, understanding that the intensity of the sensation corresponds to the severity of the potential threat. A car running a red light as he crosses the street triggers a sharp, urgent warning that sends him leaping back to the safety of the sidewalk before the vehicle passes through the intersection where he would have been standing. A classmate accidentally bumping into him in a crowded hallway generates only the faintest tickle of awareness, enough to alert him to the contact but not suggesting any real danger. The sense seems to operate independently of his conscious awareness, warning him of threats he has not noticed, and could not have detected through normal perception, giving him a continuous awareness of his immediate environment that makes it almost impossible for anyone to surprise or ambush him. The scientific part of Peter's mind wants to understand the mechanism behind this spider sense, to develop a theory that explains how it works and why it seems to defy conventional physics and biology. He considers various possibilities, that it might be an enhanced sensitivity to vibrations in the air or ground, a kind of sonar or radar sense that detects movement and objects through subtle changes in atmospheric pressure or electromagnetic fields. Perhaps it is a form of unconscious pattern recognition, his enhanced brain processing visual and auditory cues too subtle for his conscious mind to notice, and alerting him to potential dangers based on complex calculations performed below the level of awareness. Or maybe, and this possibility both excites and unsettles him, the spider sense operates through some mechanism that science has not yet discovered, some quantum entanglement or precognitive ability that allows him to perceive threats slightly before they occur in normal time. Whatever its source, the spider sense proves to be perhaps the most valuable of all his new abilities, the one that will save his life countless times in the years to come, warning him of dangers that his other enhanced senses might miss, giving him the split-second advantage that makes the difference between life and death in high-speed battles with enemies who possess powers and weapons of their own. The sense creates a bubble of awareness around him, an invisible sphere within which nothing can approach or threaten him without triggering a warning, making him almost impossible to attack by surprise, and giving him confidence that as long as he trusts the tingling at the base of his skull, he will have time to respond to whatever dangers the world throws at him. Peter's return to school the following Monday, after a long weekend spent exploring and practicing with his new abilities in the privacy of his home, marks the beginning of his attempts to navigate normal teenage life while possessing powers that set him fundamentally apart from everyone around him. The experience of walking through the familiar hallways of Midtown High School with enhanced senses and capabilities creates a strange sense of dislocation, as if he is moving through a world he once belonged to, but which no longer quite fits him, as if the transformation has placed him in a category separate from ordinary humanity and created an invisible barrier between himself and his classmates that has nothing to do with social status or academic achievement. He can hear conversations from across the school, can detect the approach of teachers or students long before they come into view, can sense the emotional undercurrents and social dynamics playing out around him with a clarity that makes the teenage social hierarchy seem both more obvious and more absurd. The casual cruelties that students inflict on one another, the posturing and status-seeking, the desperate attempts to fit in and be accepted, all of it seems smaller and less important from the perspective of someone who has been fundamentally changed, who has tasted real power and glimpsed possibilities that exist far beyond the concerns of high school popularity contests. Flash Thompson's attempts at bullying, which once had the power to humiliate and hurt Peter, now feel almost quaint in their ineffectiveness, the physical intimidation meaningless when Peter could easily overpower the larger boy without even trying. The verbal mockery unable to wound someone who has discovered that he possesses abilities that make him objectively superior to his tormentors in ways they cannot imagine. When Flash shoves Peter against a locker in front of a crowd of laughing students, expecting the usual response of embarrassed submission, Peter's body reacts automatically, his enhanced reflexes and strength taking over before his conscious mind can stop them. His hand catches Flash's wrist before the shove can land with any real force, and with what feels like the gentlest of pressure, Peter pushes the larger boy away, sending Flash stumbling backwards several feet to land awkwardly against the opposite wall. The hallway falls silent, students staring in shock at the impossible sight of scrawny Peter Parker not only standing up to Flash Thompson, but actually overpowering him. Physically dominating someone who has twice his mass and years of athletic training. Flash himself looks stunned and confused, unable to comprehend what just happened, his social reality fundamentally challenged by this unexpected reversal of their established power dynamic. Peter realizes immediately that he's made a mistake, that drawing attention to himself and revealing even a hint of his enhanced abilities is dangerous and foolish, potentially leading to questions he cannot answer and investigations that might uncover the truth about his transformation. He stammers an apology, claims that Flash slipped or lost his balance, tries to downplay the incident and restore the normal order of things where he is the victim and Flash is the aggressor, but the damage has been done. Students who never paid attention to Peter before now look at him with new interest and curiosity, wondering what else the quiet science nerd might be capable of, whether this sudden display of unexpected strength represents a permanent change or just a lucky accident. The incident teaches Peter an important lesson about the need for restraint and careful control, about the dangers of allowing his enhanced abilities to become visible to people who would not understand them or who might seek to exploit them for their own purposes. He resolves to be more careful, to maintain his cover as an ordinary teenager even more diligently, to ensure that his moments of power and capability remain hidden from casual observation. The double life he will eventually lead as Peter Parker and Spider-Man begins here, in this decision to present two different faces to the world, to be simultaneously the overlooked nobody and the powerful hero, to never allow the two identities to obviously connect in ways that would put his loved ones at risk. The wrestling match that will prove to be such a pivotal moment in Peter's development comes to his attention through a poster he sees in the window of a small gym near his school, advertising an open challenge where any amateur who can last 3 minutes in the ring with professional wrestler Crusher Hogan will win a prize of $100. The amount of money, substantial for a teenager in 1962, immediately captures Peter's attention as he considers what he could do with those funds, the microscope he has wanted for his home laboratory, the books he cannot afford to buy, perhaps even a contribution to the household expenses that would ease some of the financial pressure on Aunt May and Uncle Ben. But more than the money, the challenge represents an opportunity to test his abilities in a controlled environment, to discover the true limits of his enhanced strength and reflexes against an opponent who is skilled and powerful, to see whether his transformation has made him capable of feats that would seem superhuman to ordinary observers. The decision to enter the wrestling match forms slowly over the course of several days, Peter weighing the risks against the rewards, considering whether the potential exposure of his abilities is worth the prize money and the satisfaction of proving to himself what he has become. The ethical implications of using his enhanced powers to win money in what is supposed to be a fair contest barely register in Peter's thinking during this period, his mind still operating according to the logic of a bullied teenager who has been given unexpected power and sees nothing wrong with using that power to improve his own circumstances. Uncle Ben's words about responsibility echo faintly in his memory, but Peter has not yet connected those abstract principles to his concrete situation, has not yet understood that his transformation comes with obligations that extend beyond his own desires and needs. He's still thinking like a teenage boy who's been given a gift, not yet like a hero who's been given a calling. The costume that Peter creates for his wrestling appearance is assembled from items found around the house and purchased cheaply from thrift stores. A crude disguise designed more to hide his identity than to make any particular fashion statement. He finds an old red shirt and uses a marker to draw a rough spiderweb pattern across the chest. The design inspired by his new abilities and the spider that gave them to him. A pair of blue sweatpants serves as the lower half of the costume, and he creates a simple mask from red fabric that covers his head and face, leaving only his eyes exposed, ensuring that if his display of enhanced abilities attracts unwanted attention, at least no one will be able to connect the masked wrestler to Peter Parker of Queens. The whole ensemble is amateurish and somewhat embarrassing, lacking any of the sleekness or professionalism that will characterize his later Spider-Man costume, but it serves its purpose of providing anonymity while he tests his powers in public. He chooses the name Spider-Man almost as an afterthought when he fills out the entry form for the wrestling challenge, the moniker seeming obvious given his spider-derived abilities. Though he gives no real thought to whether he will use the name again, or whether this is the beginning of a superhero identity that will define the rest of his life. The night of the wrestling match, Peter sneaks out of the house, after Aunt May and Uncle Ben have gone to bed, carrying his makeshift costume in a backpack and feeling a mixture of excitement and guilt about the deception. He takes the subway into Manhattan, riding through tunnels beneath the city toward the address listed on the poster, his enhanced senses making the crowded car feel almost overwhelming. The press of bodies and the cacophony of voices and the vibrations of the train all amplified beyond what normal human perception would register. He finds himself having to consciously dial down his awareness, to filter out the excess sensory input. Learning for the first time that enhanced abilities can be as much a curse as a blessing when they make normal human environments feel hostile and chaotic. The wrestling arena is exactly what Peter expected. A small, shabby venue in a questionable neighbourhood, the kind of place where serious athletic competition takes a backseat to spectacle and entertainment, where the crowd comes not to see skilled wrestling, but to watch amateurs get pummeled by professionals and to bet on how long the challengers will last before being defeated. The air inside is thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of cheap beer, the crowd already rowdy and excited, their voices creating a wall of sound that would be overwhelming even without Peter's enhanced hearing. He makes his way to the dressing area, a cramped room with peeling paint and a single cracked mirror, where other challengers are preparing for their moments in the ring, most of them looking nervous or resigned to their fate, a few appearing drunk or reckless enough to think they might actually have a chance against the professional wrestler. Peter changes into his crude costume in a bathroom stall, the red shirt and blue pants and homemade mask transforming him into someone other than the shy science student from Queens, giving him a sense of anonymity and freedom that makes what he is about to do feel less like cheating and more like an adventure, a test of his new self against the world. When his name is called, or rather when the name Spider-Man is announced to general laughter and catcalls from the crowd, who assume this is some kind of joke, Peter makes his way to the ring with his heart pounding, not from fear but from anticipation, eager to discover what his enhanced body can do when pushed to perform. Crusher Hogan is everything his name suggests. A massive man with muscles like boulders and a face that suggests he has been in more fights than Peter has had birthdays. He stands in the centre of the ring looking amused and slightly contemptuous as Peter climbs through the ropes, the size difference between them so dramatic that the crowd's laughter increases, bets being shouted across the arena about how many seconds the skinny kid in the ridiculous costume will last before being thrown from the ring. The referee explains the rules, that Peter needs to remain in the ring for 3 minutes without being pinned or forced to submit, a challenge that seems impossible to everyone watching except Peter himself, who knows what his enhanced strength and reflexes will allow him to accomplish. When the bell rings to start the match, Hogan advances with the confidence of someone who has fought and defeated hundreds of challengers, expecting this to be another quick and easy victory to entertain the crowd. What happens instead becomes the stuff of legend in this small corner of the wrestling world. A story that will be told and retold with increasing embellishment until the truth becomes almost unrecognizable beneath layers of exaggeration and myth. Peter does not just survive the 3 minutes required to win the challenge, he dominates the match in ways that leave both Hogan and the audience stunned and disbelieving. His enhanced abilities allowing him to move with a speed and grace that makes the professional wrestler look slow and clumsy by comparison. When Hogan throws a punch meant to intimidate or potentially end the match early, Peter's spider sense warns him of the attack before it is fully launched, giving him time to dodge with a casual lean that makes the powerful blow whistle harmlessly past his head. When Hogan tries to grab him for a wrestling hold, Peter slips from his grasp with the ease of someone who understands leverage and body mechanics at an instinctive level, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to counter every attempt at a grip before it can be established. And when Peter decides to go on the offensive, his enhanced strength allows him to lift and throw the much larger man with an ease that seems to defy physics. Hogan's massive frame sailing through the air to land with tooth-rattling impacts that send shockwaves through the ring. The crowd's reaction evolves from laughter to shocked silence to wild cheering as they realize they are witnessing something genuinely extraordinary, something that cannot be explained by skill or luck alone. A display of ability that seems to cross the line from human into superhuman. Peter revels in their applause and amazement, feeding off the energy of their approval in a way that feels intoxicating after years of being overlooked and dismissed, finally receiving the kind of recognition and admiration that he has always craved but never received. For those 3 minutes in the ring, and for the moments afterward when the crowd chants his name and the referee raises his arm in victory, Peter Parker experiences what it feels like to be celebrated rather than mocked, to be seen as powerful rather than weak, to command respect through ability rather than suffer contempt for perceived inadequacy. The money he wins is paid out in cash, crisp bills counted into his hand by a promoter who looks both impressed and calculating, already thinking about how this unexpected talent might be exploited for profit. The man hands Peter a business card and suggests that there might be other opportunities for someone with his abilities, television appearances perhaps, or a regular spot in wrestling shows where his spectacular style could attract audiences and generate revenue. Peter pockets both the money and the card, his mind already racing ahead to possibilities he had not previously considered, ways that his enhanced abilities might be turned into a career that would provide financial security for himself and his family, while also giving him the kind of public recognition that his intelligence alone has never generated. As he leaves the arena, still wearing his crude costume, counting the money and basking in the afterglow of his victory, Peter has no sense that he is making decisions that will haunt him, that the path he is beginning to walk leads not toward fame and fortune, but toward tragedy, and the hard-won understanding that power used for selfish purposes creates debts that must eventually be paid. Uncle Ben's words about responsibility remain abstract and distant. Wisdom that Peter acknowledges intellectually but has not yet internalized emotionally, has not yet connected to his own enhanced abilities and the choices he is making about how to use them. The television appearance that follows from the wrestling match occurs with surprising speed. The promoter making good on his suggestion and arranging for Peter to demonstrate his abilities on a local variety show that specializes in unusual acts and human interest stories. The exposure is both more and less than Peter imagined. The studio audience impressed by his feats of strength and agility, but treating him more as a curiosity than as a serious performer, their applause genuine but also slightly condescending. As if they are watching a clever trick rather than witnessing something genuinely remarkable. Still, the appearance generates additional income that Peter adds to his growing stash of secret money. Funds he plans to reveal to Aunt May and Uncle Ben at some point with a cover story about winning a science competition, or finding a lucrative tutoring opportunity. The television studio where Peter performs his demonstration is a maze of hallways and technical equipment. Cameras and lights creating an artificial environment where reality is shaped and manipulated for entertainment purposes. After his appearance on the show, as Peter makes his way through the building toward the exit, still wearing his Spider-Man costume because he has nowhere private to change, he hears a commotion from one of the corridors ahead, shouting voices and the sound of running feet. His spider sense tingles with a mild warning. Nothing suggesting immediate personal danger, but alerting him that something is happening nearby that merits attention. As Peter rounds a corner, he sees a thin man in a dark jacket running toward him at full speed, a bag clutched in his hands and a look of desperate determination on his face. Behind the running man, an older security guard gives chase, his face red with exertion and anger, shouting for someone to stop the thief who has just robbed the building's business office. The fleeing criminal and the pursuing guard are heading directly toward Peter, who stands in the corridor with his enhanced abilities available for use, capable of easily stopping the thief and helping the guard recover the stolen money. For a moment that will stretch across the rest of his life, a frozen instant of decision that will define everything that follows, Peter considers acting, using his powers to apprehend the criminal and prevent the theft. His spider sense tracks the approaching man's trajectory, calculates the timing required for an intervention, informs him that catching the thief would be trivially easy, requiring only a quick motion to block the corridor or web the man's feet to send him sprawling. But other thoughts crowd into Peter's mind in that same instant. Concerns about his own welfare that seem, in the moment, to outweigh any obligation to help a stranger. The security guard is calling out to him now, having seen the masked figure standing in the corridor and assuming that someone wearing a costume and obviously possessing unusual abilities would naturally want to help apprehend a criminal. "Stop him," the guard shouts. "You can catch him easy with those powers." But Peter hesitates. Thinking about the conversation he had with the television producer after his appearance on the show, the man's advice that Peter should focus on building his career and not waste time and energy on problems that are not his responsibility. He thinks about the risks of getting involved, the possibility of injury or legal complications, the chance that helping might somehow interfere with his growing opportunities to profit from his abilities. The thief is almost upon him now, just a few feet away, and Peter makes his decision, stepping aside to let the criminal pass, pressing himself against the wall of the corridor and offering no resistance as the man rushes by, the stolen bag brushing against Peter's costume in the moment of passage. The security guard, arriving seconds later, stares at Peter with a mixture of confusion and disgust, unable to comprehend why someone with obvious powers would choose not to help. Would stand aside and allow a criminal to escape when intervention would have been so easy. The guard's questions come in an angry rush, demanding to know why Peter did not stop the thief, what kind of person has the ability to help but chooses not to use it, how he can live with himself knowing that his inaction allowed a crime to succeed when he could have prevented it. Peter's response, delivered with the casual arrogance of someone who has not yet learned what his choices will cost, echoes the television producer's advice and reveals the selfishness that still governs his use of his enhanced abilities. "I'm not a policeman," he tells the guard. "I'm an entertainer. It's not my job to catch criminals. Sorry." The word sounds hollow even as Peter speaks it, the apology clearly not sincere, and the guard's expression of contempt and disappointment makes clear his judgment of Peter's character and his choices. But Peter turns away from that judgment, walking toward the exit and telling himself that he made the right decision, that he has no obligation to risk his career or his safety for strangers who have done nothing for him, that the world has been cruel enough to Peter Parker, that Spider-Man owes the world nothing in return. The security guard's final words follow him down the corridor, a question that Peter dismisses, but which will return to haunt him with terrible force in the very near future. What kind of person does that? The question hangs in the air unanswered as Peter leaves the television studio and makes his way home through the city streets, his pockets full of money and his heart full of plans for a future where his enhanced abilities will bring him the recognition and success that his intelligence alone has never provided. He has no sense of the machinery of fate grinding into motion around him, no awareness that the man he allowed to escape is even now making choices that will intersect with Peter's life in the most devastating way possible. No understanding that the decision he just made to prioritize his own interests over his responsibility to help others will become the defining mistake of his life and the foundation of all his future heroism. Uncle Ben's words about power and responsibility remain abstract and intellectual, wisdom that Peter agrees with in principle, but has not yet applied to his own enhanced abilities, has not yet recognized as a law of the universe that cannot be violated without consequences. The lesson is coming, approaching with the inevitability of a train on tracks, and when it arrives it will be written in blood and grief and guilt so profound that it will reshape Peter's entire understanding of what it means to have power and what that power demands of those who possess it. But for now, in this moment before everything changes, Peter Parker walks home through the quiet streets of Queens, counting his money and planning his future. Still a boy who has gained great power but has not yet learned what that power will cost him, has not yet paid the terrible price that will transform him from someone who uses his abilities for his own benefit into someone who dedicates his life to ensuring that no one else suffers the consequences of his selfish choices. The days following Peter's decision to let the thief escape pass in a blur of small triumphs and growing confidence, each television appearance and wrestling match adding to his collection of money and his sense that he has discovered a path toward a future very different from the one that seemed inevitable just weeks ago. The crude costume has been replaced with something slightly more professional, still homemade but more carefully constructed, the spiderweb pattern more precise, the mask fitting better, the whole ensemble suggesting someone who is taking his new identity seriously and investing in the image he presents to the public. Peter practices his movements and his poses, developing a style that combines acrobatic grace with displays of strength, creating a performance that entertains audiences while also showcasing the genuine superhuman abilities that set him apart from ordinary wrestlers and variety show performers. Aunt May and Uncle Ben notice that Peter seems happier, more confident. The perpetual worried frown that has characterized his expression since his parents' death, replaced by something approaching contentment and self-assurance. They attribute the change to normal teenage development, perhaps a growth spurt or newfound success in his studies, possibly even a romantic interest, though Peter shows no signs of dating or spending time with classmates outside of school. May comments to Ben one evening, as they sit together in the living room after Peter has gone upstairs to do homework, that their nephew seems to be coming into his own, finding his place in the world, growing into the young man they always believed he could become. Ben agrees, though something in Peter's new confidence troubles him slightly, a quality he cannot quite name or explain, a sense that the boy is perhaps too focused on himself and his own achievements, not quite as attuned to others and their needs as Ben would hope. The conversation that Ben has been planning to have with Peter, a follow-up to their earlier discussion about power and responsibility, keeps getting postponed as the demands of work and household routine consume the time and energy that deeper discussions require. Ben wants to explore with his nephew how Peter is thinking about his future, what values will guide his choices as he moves toward adulthood, how he plans to use his obvious intelligence and talents in ways that contribute to the world rather than simply advancing his own interests. But the conversation remains unspoken, delayed by circumstance and the assumption that there will always be time for these important discussions, that the relationship between uncle and nephew is solid enough to withstand any amount of postponement, that the wisdom Ben wants to impart can wait for a more convenient moment that will surely arrive soon. Peter, for his part, is so absorbed in his secret life as Spider-Man, and his plans for capitalizing on his abilities, that he barely notices the opportunities for deeper connection with the man who raised him. When Ben suggests they take another evening walk, Peter begs off with excuses about homework or tiredness, not wanting to risk a conversation that might lead to questions about how he is spending his time or what he is thinking about his future. The distance that grows between them during this period is subtle and gradual, neither of them recognizing it as significant or troubling, both assuming that their relationship is fundamentally unchanged, even as Peter's secret creates barriers to the kind of openness and honesty that true intimacy requires. The Thursday evening that will change everything forever begins with perfect ordinariness, the kind of routine domestic evening that the Parker household has experienced thousands of times. The familiar rhythms of dinner preparation and table conversation, creating a comfortable backdrop for the drama that will soon unfold. May is cooking pot roast with vegetables, one of Peter's favourite meals, and the smells drifting through the house create an atmosphere of warmth and security, the olfactory signature of home and family, and the simple pleasures of shared meals. Ben arrives home from work slightly later than usual, apologising for the delay and explaining that he picked up an extra shift at the warehouse, where he works as a night security guard. The overtime pay welcome, but the long hours showing in the tired lines of his face. Peter is upstairs in his room, ostensibly working on homework but actually counting the money he has accumulated from his Spider-Man performances, the growing stack of bills representing possibilities and dreams, a ticket to a future where financial worries no longer dominate household conversations and where his contributions might ease some of the burden that Ben and May carry. He has been thinking about when and how to reveal his new income source, what cover story might explain the sudden influx of cash without raising questions about how a teenage boy could earn so much money in such a short time. The truth is obviously impossible to tell, but Peter has convinced himself that a well-crafted lie in service of helping his family is morally acceptable, that the deception is justified by the good it will accomplish. The call to dinner brings Peter downstairs, and the three of them gather around the familiar table, the ritual of the meal creating space for conversation and connection, even as Peter's secret creates distance he does not fully acknowledge. May serves the food with her usual care, making sure everyone has enough, offering seconds before anyone's plate is empty, expressing love through the language of nourishment and attention. Ben asks about Peter's day, and Peter offers vague responses about school and homework, editing out the afternoon spent planning his next television appearance and practicing new acrobatic moves that will impress audiences and generate more income. The conversation turns to money, as it often does in households where finances are tight and every expense must be carefully considered. May mentions that the refrigerator has been making strange noises and might need repair or replacement, a concern that creates visible worry on Ben's face as he calculates whether they can afford such an unexpected expense. Peter sees an opening to introduce the topic of his own financial contribution, to suggest that he might be able to help with household costs, but something holds him back, a reluctance to have the conversation now, a preference for waiting until he has accumulated even more money and can make a more impressive revelation. After dinner, Ben mentions that he needs to leave soon for his night shift at the warehouse, the security job that helps supplement his daytime income and keeps the household finances just barely stable. May fusses over him, making sure he has eaten enough, packing leftovers for his lunch break, reminding him to be careful and to call if he needs anything. The affection between them is gentle and long established, the easy comfort of two people who have spent decades together and know each other's rhythms and needs. Ben kisses May on the cheek, pats Peter on the shoulder, and reminds his nephew to help with the dishes and to not stay up too late working on homework, the ordinary domestic instructions of a parent to a child. Words spoken without any awareness that they might be the last normal interaction they ever share. Peter watches his uncle prepare to leave, notes the tiredness in Ben's movements, and the slight stoop of his shoulders that speaks of long years of physical labour, and feels a sudden impulse to say something meaningful, to express appreciation or love, or simply to acknowledge the sacrifices that Ben makes for their family. But the moment passes without words, Peter's attention already drifting back to his own concerns, and Ben leaves the house with nothing more than the casual goodbye of someone who expects to return in the morning as he always does, who has no reason to think that this evening is any different from hundreds of others that have preceded it. The phone call comes at 10:47 in the evening, the precise time burned into Peter's memory forever after. A moment when his life divides into before and after, when the comfortable world he's always known shatters and can never be fully repaired. Peter is in his room, supposedly sleeping but actually planning his next Spider-Man appearance, when he hears the phone ring downstairs, the sound cutting through the quiet house with unusual urgency. He hears May answer, her voice bright with its customary greeting, and then the tone changes, shifts into something tight and frightened. A sound that brings Peter to his feet and sends him moving toward the stairs before his conscious mind has fully registered that something is wrong. May's voice calls up to him, saying his name with a tremor that he has never heard before, and Peter takes the stairs two at a time, his enhanced reflexes making the descent almost instantaneous. May stands in the hallway with the phone receiver still in her hand, her face drained of colour, her free hand pressed against her chest as if to steady a heart that has suddenly begun beating too fast. She looks at Peter with eyes that are already filling with tears, and she tries to speak, but the words catch in her throat, come out broken and incomplete. "Ben," she manages finally. "There's been an incident at the warehouse. We need to get to the hospital." The drive to the hospital passes in a blur of streetlights and traffic signals, May's hands gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, her eyes fixed on the road ahead with desperate focus, as if reaching their destination faster might somehow change what has already happened. Peter sits in the passenger seat, feeling a strange numbness spreading through his body, his enhanced senses picking up details with unwanted clarity. The sound of May's ragged breathing, the tremor in her hands, the tears that stream down her face though she makes no sound of crying. His spider sense is quiet, offering no warning of danger because the danger has already struck, the terrible event already in the past, the harm already done beyond his ability to prevent or fix. The hospital emergency room is a chaos of bright lights and urgent voices, medical personnel moving with practiced efficiency, visitors sitting in uncomfortable chairs with expressions ranging from worried to devastated. May approaches the reception desk and gives Ben's name, her voice barely above a whisper, and the nurse's expression softens with sympathy as she checks her records and then asks them to wait, saying that a doctor will come speak with them shortly. The word shortly stretches into an eternity as Peter and May sit side by side in the waiting area, not speaking because there are no words adequate to the moment, both of them trapped in the terrible space between hope and despair, wanting to believe that everything will be fine but unable to ignore the evidence of May's devastated expression and the nurse's sympathetic tone. When the doctor finally appears, a tired-looking woman in surgical scrubs with kind eyes and a gentle manner, the news she delivers is delivered with compassion, but also with the directness that medical professionals learn to employ when there is no good way to soften the truth. Ben Parker was brought in by ambulance approximately 45 minutes ago, she explains, suffering from a gunshot wound to the chest sustained during what appears to have been a robbery at the warehouse where he worked. The medical team did everything possible to save him, but the damage was too severe, the blood loss too great, the injury too catastrophic for even the most skilled intervention to overcome. Ben passed away before the ambulance reached the hospital, she says, using the gentle euphemism that healthcare workers employ when speaking of death, and there was nothing anyone could have done to change the outcome. The sound that comes from May is not quite a scream, and not quite a sob, something more primal and broken, the noise of a heart shattering, of a life being torn in half, of love meeting loss and finding no way to reconcile the two. She collapses into a chair, her small frame seeming to fold in on itself, and Peter finds himself kneeling beside her, holding her hand while his own mind tries to process the impossible information that Uncle Ben is gone, that the man who raised him and taught him and loved him will never come home again, that the steady presence that has been the foundation of his entire life has been suddenly and violently removed, leaving a void that nothing can fill. The practical details that follow, the paperwork and the identification of the body and the arrangements that must be made, pass in a haze of numbness and disbelief. Peter moves through the required tasks mechanically, his enhanced body functioning while his mind struggles to accept the reality of what has happened. He sees Ben's body in the hospital morgue, the face peaceful in death but somehow smaller and more fragile than Peter remembers, the vitality and warmth that defined his uncle now absent, leaving only the physical shell behind. The gunshot wound has been covered by the medical team, sparing Peter the sight of the injury itself, but knowing how Ben died, knowing that his last moments were filled with violence and fear, creates an anguish that goes beyond the simple fact of death. The police are waiting to speak with them when Peter and May emerge from the morgue, two detectives who introduce themselves with professional sympathy and explain that they need to ask some questions about Ben and the circumstances of the shooting. May is too devastated to speak coherently, so Peter answers on behalf of both of them, providing basic information about Ben's employment at the warehouse, his routine, any enemies he might have had, Though the idea of Ben having enemies is absurd to the point of being offensive, the detectives explain that they believe Ben interrupted a burglary in progress, that he confronted the intruder and was shot when he tried to prevent the theft, that witnesses saw a man fleeing the scene, and have provided a description that matches several known criminals in the area. One of the detectives mentions almost as an aside that they have a lead on the suspect's location, that officers have the warehouse surrounded and are moving in to apprehend the burglar, who is apparently still hiding somewhere in the building. The information barely registers with Peter in the moment, his attention focused entirely on supporting May and getting her home. But later, lying in his bed and staring at the ceiling while tears stream down his face, the knowledge that his uncle's killer is at large becomes intolerable, transforming grief into rage and creating a need for justice, or perhaps for vengeance that overwhelms every other consideration. Peter waits until he hears May's sobbing quiet in the room next door, the exhausted sleep of someone whose body is simply shut down under the weight of too much emotion. And then he rises from his bed and pulls on his Spider-Man costume, the outfit that has represented fun and profit and personal achievement now taking on a darker purpose. His hands shake as he adjusts the mask, not from fear, but from the intensity of the emotions coursing through him. Feelings too powerful to contain or control, a mixture of grief and rage and guilt that he does not yet fully understand, but which drives him out into the night with singular purpose. The warehouse district is dark and quiet when Peter arrives, his enhanced senses allowing him to navigate the shadows with ease. To approach the building where Ben died without being detected by the police officers who have established a perimeter around the structure. His spider sense guides him to an entrance that is unwatched, and he slips inside with the silence of his namesake, moving through the familiar spaces where Ben spent so many nights working to support their family, spaces now transformed into a crime scene, marked with police tape and the chalk outlines of where evidence has been collected. Finding the burglar proves easier than Peter expected, his enhanced hearing picking up the sound of nervous breathing from somewhere in the building's upper level, his spider sense directing him toward the threat with unerring accuracy. He climbs the walls with unconscious ease, moving along the ceiling like the spider whose powers he possesses, approaching his prey from above in a way that would terrify any ordinary person who happened to look up and see a masked figure defying gravity. The burglar is hiding in an old storage room, counting stolen money by the light of a small flashlight, apparently unaware or unconcerned that the police have the building surrounded, perhaps assuming that he can wait them out, or find an escape route that they have not anticipated. Peter drops from the ceiling with sudden violence, landing directly in front of the burglar with an impact that makes the floor shake, his enhanced strength and mass creating an entrance dramatic enough to freeze the criminal in place with shock and fear. The man looks up with wide eyes, the flashlight falling from his hands, and Peter sees his face clearly for the first time, sees the features of the person who killed Uncle Ben, the man whose actions have destroyed Peter's family and stolen someone precious and irreplaceable from the world. And in that moment of recognition, the universe reveals its cruelty and its justice in equal measure. Because Peter knows this face, has seen it before just days ago. Running down a television studio corridor with stolen money while Peter stood aside and let him pass. The realization hits Peter with the force of a physical blow, stealing his breath and making his knees threaten to buckle beneath him. This is the thief from the television studio, the man that Peter could have stopped with trivial ease. The criminal whose escape Peter facilitated through his selfishness and his unwillingness to accept responsibility for using his powers to help others. If Peter had acted that day, if he had listened to the security guard's plea for help, instead of stepping aside and making excuses about not being a policeman, then this man would have been in jail when the warehouse job presented itself. Ben would have worked his shift in safety, would have come home in the morning as he always did, would still be alive and whole and present in the world that his absence now renders fundamentally broken. The guilt that crashes over Peter in this moment of understanding is more crushing than any physical weight, more painful than any injury his enhanced body might sustain. Uncle Ben is dead because Peter chose selfishness over responsibility, because he used his powers for his own benefit rather than to help others, because he failed to understand what Ben had been trying to teach him about the obligations that come with capability. The words echo through Peter's mind with terrible clarity now, their meaning finally, devastatingly understood through the lesson written in blood and grief. With great power comes great responsibility. Peter had power, the power to stop this man, and he chose not to use it, chose instead to preserve his own comfort and pursue his own interests. And that choice has cost him the person he loved most in the world. The rage that fills Peter as he stands over his uncle's killer is unlike anything he has ever experienced. A fury so complete and consuming that it threatens to burn away everything that Ben and May taught him about compassion and restraint and the value of human life. His hands curl into fists with strength enough to shatter concrete, and he moves toward the cowering burglar with murder in his heart, ready to exact a vengeance that seems not just justified, but morally required, to make this man pay with his life for the life he took, to balance the cosmic scales through violence that would leave Peter's hands stained with blood but his rage perhaps satisfied. The burglar scrambles backward, stammering explanations and excuses, claiming that he did not mean to shoot anyone, that the gun went off accidentally, that he never wanted anyone to get hurt. The words are meaningless noise to Peter, who can barely hear them over the roaring in his ears, the sound of his own rage demanding expression, calling for the kind of justice that the legal system might not provide, that can only come from personal action and direct retribution. He advances on the burglar with his enhanced strength ready to be employed, to crush and destroy, to kill this man as he killed Ben, to end a life in payment for a life, and perhaps find some relief from the crushing guilt and grief that threatened to destroy Peter's sanity. But even in the depths of his rage, even as his fists rise and his enhanced muscles tense for the killing blow, Uncle Ben's voice speaks in Peter's memory. Not the words about power and responsibility, but something simpler and more fundamental. The lessons taught through years of example about who Peter should be and what kind of man he should strive to become. Ben never advocated for violence or vengeance, never suggested that might makes right or that those with power are entitled to use it however their emotions dictate. He taught kindness and patience and the importance of law and justice, the difference between what we want to do in moments of anger and what we should do if we're to remain good people, if we're to honour the values we claim to hold. Peter's fists shake as they hover over the burglar, trembling with the effort of restraint, with the battle between rage and conscience that wages within him. To kill this man would be easy, would require only a fraction of his enhanced strength, would feel justified and right in this moment of overwhelming emotion. But to kill would also be to become something that Uncle Ben would not recognise, to betray the values that Ben spent a lifetime teaching, to dishonour his memory by using the powers Peter gained accidentally to commit the very kind of violence that took Ben's life. The realisation that killing this man would hurt Ben rather than honour him, would destroy Peter rather than heal him, provides the fragile thread of control that allows Peter to step back from the edge of becoming a murderer. His fists unclench, slowly, painfully, the physical act of restraint requiring more strength than any feat of spider-powered athletics. Peter wraps the burglar in webbing instead of breaking his neck, binds him thoroughly and completely so that he cannot escape or harm anyone else, but leaves him alive and breathing, available for the justice system to process according to law, rather than according to Peter's rage. The criminal sobs and babbles his thanks and his continued excuses, but Peter hears none of it. His attention already turning inward to the implications of what he has learned and what he must now do with the knowledge and the guilt and the terrible understanding of his own failure. Peter leaves the warehouse through the same route he entered, bypassing the police who are even now preparing to storm the building, knowing that they will find the burglar secured and helpless, available for arrest and prosecution. He swings through the dark city streets with his enhanced agility, Moving from building to building with mechanical precision, his body performing the acrobatic movements automatically while his mind struggles with the weight of recognition and responsibility. He has learned the lesson that Uncle Ben tried to teach him, but the tuition has been paid in the life of the teacher, the education purchased with blood and grief, and a loss that can never be recovered or repaired. When Peter finally returns home in the early hours of the morning, he finds May still sleeping the exhausted sleep of grief, her face tear-stained but peaceful in unconsciousness. He removes his Spider-Man costume and hides it carefully, the outfit that once represented excitement and opportunity, now symbolizing the mistakes and moral failures that have cost him so much. He climbs into his bed and lies staring at the ceiling, tears streaming down his face. His enhanced body capable of lifting cars and stopping criminals, but powerless to undo the past or restore what has been lost. The vow that Peter makes in those dark hours before dawn is both simple and profound. A commitment that will shape the rest of his life and define his identity as a hero. Never again will he use his powers purely for his own benefit. Never again will he stand aside when he has the ability to help others. Never again will he allow his selfishness or his comfort or his personal desires to prevent him from accepting the responsibility that his enhanced abilities create. Uncle Ben died because Peter failed to understand that with great power comes great responsibility. But Ben's death will not be meaningless if it teaches Peter the lesson fully and irrevocably, if it transforms him from someone who uses power for personal gain into someone who dedicates his life to ensuring that others do not suffer the consequences of criminal violence and moral failure. The boy who gained spider powers by accident has become, through tragedy and guilt and the terrible weight of understanding, someone who knows what those powers truly mean and what they demand of him. Spider-Man was born in the moment when a radioactive spider bit Peter Parker, but the hero that Spider-Man will become was born in this moment of loss and recognition, when Peter understands finally and completely that his uncle's death is the price of his moral education, the cost of learning what responsibility truly means, and why it cannot be avoided or evaded without devastating consequence. The web that will connect all of Peter's future actions has its anchor point here. In this moment of grief transformed into purpose, of guilt alchemized into commitment, of personal tragedy becoming the foundation for a heroic mission that will save countless lives and inspire generations of others to embrace their own responsibilities with courage and dedication. The morning after Uncle Ben's death arrives with cruel brightness, sunlight streaming through Peter's bedroom window, as if the world has not fundamentally changed, as if something precious and irreplaceable has not been torn from the fabric of existence. Peter lies in his bed with eyes red from crying, staring at the ceiling and watching dust motes drift through the beams of light, his enhanced vision tracking their movement with unwanted precision, while his mind circles endlessly around the events of the previous night, examining and re-examining the chain of choices that led to tragedy, trying to find some way to make the past different, even though he knows that time moves in only one direction and carries all mistakes forward into an unchangeable future. The house is silent in a way that feels oppressive and wrong, the absence of Uncle Ben's presence creating a void that seems to extend beyond the mere physical, affecting the very atmosphere of the home and the quality of the air itself. Peter can hear May moving about downstairs, the small sounds of someone going through familiar morning routines mechanically, putting coffee on to brew and beginning to prepare breakfast from habit rather than hunger. Her movements slower than usual and punctuated by moments of complete stillness, when the reality of what has happened presumably crashes over her anew. The grief in the house is almost tangible, a heaviness that Peter's enhanced senses perceive as clearly as they would detect smoke or changes in air pressure, an emotional weight that presses down on everything and makes even simple actions feel exhausting. Peter forces himself to rise from bed and prepare for the day ahead, though what shape that day will take is unclear, the normal structure of school and homework and daily routine rendered meaningless by the magnitude of what has been lost. He moves through the motions of showering and dressing with the same mechanical quality that he heard in May's movements, his body functioning while his mind remains trapped in the endless loop of guilt and recognition. The knowledge that Uncle Ben's death is his fault, creating a burden that he suspects he will carry for the rest of his life, a weight that no amount of heroic action can ever fully lift or remove. When Peter descends to the kitchen, he finds May sitting at the table with a cup of coffee growing cold in front of her, her eyes staring at nothing, her face showing the ravages of a night spent crying and a morning spent contemplating a future without the man who has been her partner for decades. She looks up as Peter enters, and the attempt she makes to smile to offer some reassurance or comfort despite her own devastation breaks Peter's heart in new ways, revealing depths of grief he has not yet begun to fully experience. They sit together in silence, both of them beyond words. The simple fact of shared presence providing what small comfort is available when language fails and nothing can be said that would make the situation even slightly better. The phone begins ringing in the late morning. Friends and neighbours and distant relatives who have heard the news and want to express their condolences, to offer help, to ask what they can do even though everyone knows that nothing can be done. That no amount of casseroles or kind words or practical assistance can restore what has been taken. May answers each call with patient grace, thanking people for their concern, accepting their offers of support, making arrangements for the funeral that must be planned and the life that must somehow continue despite the gaping wound that Ben's absence has created. Peter listens to her side of these conversations and marvels at her strength, at her ability to function and respond appropriately when his own capacity for normal human interaction feels completely exhausted. The police detective who handled the initial investigation arrives in the early afternoon, a tired-looking man with kind eyes who introduces himself as Detective Marco and explains that he wanted to update them personally on the status of the case, rather than delivering the news over the phone. He settles into the living room with the gentle deference of someone who understands the weight of grief and wants to minimize any additional burden, and he explains that the burglar who killed Ben has been apprehended, found webbed up in the warehouse in a manner that suggests intervention by the masked vigilante who's been making appearances around the city lately, the one who calls himself Spider-Man. Peter feels his stomach clench at the mention of his alter ego, wondering if the detective suspects any connection between Peter and Spider-Man, if the investigation has uncovered evidence that might lead to questions Peter is not prepared to answer. But Detective Marco shows no signs of suspicion, merely noting the fact of Spider-Man's involvement as he would note any other detail of the case, explaining that the burglar is in custody and will face charges of murder and armed robbery, that the evidence is strong and the outcome of the trial seems assured. He offers reassurance that justice will be served, that Ben's killer will pay for his crime according to the law. Though everyone in the room understands that no legal consequence can balance the scales or restore what has been lost, May thanks the detective for his information and his kindness, and after he leaves, she sits quietly for a long moment before speaking words that reveal how deeply she understands the randomness and cruelty of what has happened. Ben was just doing his job, she says, to no one in particular, just trying to provide for us and keep us safe, and he encountered evil that had nothing to do with him, violence that was not personal or targeted but simply the random intersection of a good man and a bad situation. The observation contains no anger or desire for vengeance, just a kind of exhausted acceptance of the reality that the world contains dangers that good people cannot always avoid, that sometimes tragedy strikes without reason or warning and leaves survivors to make sense of senselessness. But Peter's understanding of Ben's death is different from May's, complicated by his knowledge of the chain of causation that led to this specific tragedy. The awareness that Ben's encounter with the burglar was not purely random, but was facilitated by Peter's choice to let the man escape days earlier. The guilt that this knowledge creates is crushing and isolating, something Peter cannot share with May or with anyone else. A burden he must carry alone because revealing the truth would mean exposing his secret identity and explaining decisions that he can barely comprehend himself. let alone justify to someone else. The isolation that comes from having this secret knowledge, from understanding dimensions of the tragedy that May will never know, adds another layer to Peter's grief and creates a distance between them, even as they sit side by side on the couch. United in loss, but divided by the different meanings they attach to that loss. The days that follow Ben's death pass in a haze of funeral preparations and well-meaning visitors, the house filling with flowers and food that no one has the appetite to eat, neighbours stopping by to offer condolences and share memories of Ben, each visitor adding their piece to the mosaic of a life that touched many people in quiet ways. Peter learns things about his uncle that he never knew, stories of kindnesses offered and help provided, small acts of generosity and support that Ben never mentioned but which made differences in people's lives, the accumulated evidence of a man who lived his values rather than merely professing them, who understood responsibility not as burden but as opportunity to make the world slightly better through ordinary actions performed with extraordinary consistency. The funeral itself takes place on a grey Tuesday morning, the weather appropriately sombre, clouds hanging low over the cemetery and threatening rain that never quite materialises. The service is simple and dignified, reflecting Ben's own preferences for substance over spectacle, genuine emotion over theatrical display. The minister who officiates barely knew Ben, but has learned enough from conversations with May and with people who did know him to paint a picture of a good man, a faithful husband, a loving guardian to an orphaned nephew. A reliable friend and neighbour whose presence in the world made it measurably better, and whose absence will be felt by everyone who had the privilege of knowing him. Peter sits in the front row beside May, wearing the only suit he owns, purchased years ago and now slightly too small, the sleeves not quite reaching his wrists, the pants ending above his ankles. May holds his hand throughout the service, her grip tight and desperate, and Peter grips back with carefully controlled strength. Conscious of his enhanced abilities and the need to regulate his responses, to not accidentally hurt her, even as she seeks comfort in physical connection. He barely hears the words being spoken, the eulogies and prayers washing over him, without penetrating the shell of numbness that protects him from feeling the full weight of what is happening, the finality of the casket being lowered into the ground, the reality that he will never again hear Ben's voice, or receive his guidance, or share those evening walks that now seem precious beyond measure. The gathering after the funeral, held at the house on Ingram Street with neighbours providing food, and May receiving visitors with patient grace, feels surreal and wrong to Peter, the social rituals of death and mourning creating expectations of behaviour that he struggles to meet. People approach him with condolences and awkward attempts at comfort, telling him that Ben would be proud of him, that he needs to be strong for his aunt, that time will heal the pain even though time seems more likely to simply make the loss permanent rather than bearable. Flash Thompson appears with his parents, offering mumbled sympathy that seems genuine despite their complicated history, and Peter accepts it with numb gratitude, too exhausted to feel anything about Flash's presence except a distant appreciation that he made the effort to come. When the last visitor finally leaves, and the house falls quiet again, Peter helps May clean up the remnants of the gathering, washing dishes and putting away food, the mundane tasks providing structure and purpose to the evening. They work side by side in silence, comfortable with each other's presence but not ready for conversation, both of them too raw and exhausted for words. When the kitchen is finally clean and there's nothing left to occupy their hands or distract their minds, they sit together in the living room where Ben's chair stands empty, the furniture already beginning to feel like a memorial rather than a functional piece of the household. May speaks finally, her voice quiet but steady, talking not about Ben directly, but about the future they must somehow navigate without him. She worries about money, about whether she can maintain the house on her income alone, about Peter's education, and the expenses that will come as he prepares for college, about all the practical concerns that death brings in addition to emotional devastation. Peter assures her that they will manage, that he will find ways to contribute, that she should not worry about him when she has so much else to bear. He does not mention the money he has hidden in his room, the earnings from his Spider-Man performances, because revealing that now would require explanations he is not ready to give, and would raise questions about why he kept the income secret in the first place. Instead, Peter makes a different kind of promise, one that he can keep even if May never knows the full extent of what it means. He tells her that he will make Ben proud, that he will live according to the values and principles that Ben worked so hard to instill, that he will be responsible and thoughtful and dedicated to using his abilities, whatever they may be, in service of making the world better rather than simply advancing his own interests. May smiles through her tears and tells him that Ben was already proud, that Peter has always been a good boy who will grow into a good man, that she has no doubts about his character or his future. The faith she expresses feels simultaneously comforting and crushing, a validation of Peter's essential nature but also a weight of expectation that he fears he may not be able to meet, given the failures that led to this very tragedy. When Peter finally retreats to his room for the night, exhausted beyond measure but not ready for sleep, he pulls out his Spider-Man costume from its hiding place and holds the fabric in his hands. Studying the crude spiderweb pattern and the simple mask that has represented fun and profit and personal achievement, the outfit looks different now, transformed by what has happened. No longer a tool for entertainment or a source of income, but a symbol of the responsibility he failed to accept and the lesson he has learned at such terrible cost. He considers destroying the costume, burning it, or throwing it away, rejecting the Spider-Man identity entirely as punishment for his failures and as protection against making similar mistakes in the future. But even as the thought forms, Peter recognizes it as another form of running away, another refusal to accept responsibility. This time, the responsibility to use his powers properly rather than abandoning them entirely. Uncle Ben did not die so that Peter could hide from his abilities or pretend they do not exist. He died because Peter used those abilities selfishly, and the appropriate response is not to stop using them, but to use them better. To dedicate them to the purpose that Ben tried to teach through words, but which Peter has now learned through grief and guilt and devastating loss. The powers themselves are not the problem. The problem was Peter's understanding of what those powers demanded of him, and that understanding has now been corrected through the harshest possible instruction. Peter spends the rest of the night not sleeping, but thinking, planning, trying to transform grief and guilt into something constructive, to channel the overwhelming emotions that threaten to destroy him into a commitment that will give them purpose and direction. He thinks about Uncle Ben's words concerning power and responsibility, about the conversation they had during their evening walk, about all the small lessons and examples that Ben provided throughout Peter's life, the accumulated wisdom of a good man who understood that the measure of a person is not their capabilities but their choices, not what they can do but what they choose to do with whatever abilities they possess. The decision that crystallizes in Peter's mind during those long dark hours is both simple and profound, a commitment that will shape every day of his life from this moment forward. He will be Spider-Man, but not the Spider-Man who performed in wrestling matches and on television shows for money and applause. He will be a different kind of Spider-Man, one who uses his enhanced abilities to protect innocent people from the kind of random violence that took Uncle Ben's life, who intervenes to stop crimes and prevent tragedies, who accepts responsibility for making the city safer even when that responsibility comes with no reward or recognition, who understands that power creates obligation regardless of whether that obligation is convenient or comfortable or personally beneficial. The transformation of Spider-Man from entertainer to hero begins not with action, but with this internal commitment, this fundamental shift in understanding about what his abilities mean and what they demand of him. Peter resolves that he will patrol the streets of New York, watching for crimes in progress and stopping them before they can harm innocent people, that he will use his enhanced senses and reflexes to detect dangers that ordinary citizens cannot perceive, that he will put himself between criminals and their intended victims regardless of the risk to his own safety or comfort. The decision is not about glory or recognition, or even about justice in the abstract legal sense. It is about prevention, about ensuring that other families do not experience the kind of devastating loss that has torn his own family apart, about creating a world where fewer people die for random reasons, and where goodness has a fighting chance against the forces of selfishness and violence. But even as Peter commits himself to this new heroic mission, he understands that he cannot share this commitment with anyone, cannot reveal to May or to anyone else what he plans to do or why he has made this choice. His secret identity must be maintained not for his own protection, but for the protection of the people he loves. The knowledge that his enemies might target May or his friends if they knew who Spider-Man really was, creating a necessity for deception that Peter finds distasteful but unavoidable. The decision to keep secrets from May, especially now when their relationship is the only family either of them has left, creates another layer of isolation and loneliness. But Peter accepts this burden as part of the price of being Spider-Man, one more sacrifice that responsibility demands. The practical questions of how to be an effective hero occupy Peter's thoughts as the night slowly gives way to dawn, the details and logistics of crime fighting requiring consideration and planning. He will need a better costume, something more durable and functional than the crude outfit he wore for his performances, something that will protect his identity more completely, while also allowing freedom of movement and flexibility. He will need to develop his abilities more fully, to practice and refine his skills until they become second nature, until he can use his enhanced strength and reflexes with perfect precision and control. He will need to learn about crime patterns and police procedures, to understand how criminals think and operate, to become a student of the city he has committed himself to protecting. But underneath all these practical considerations runs a deeper commitment, an emotional and moral resolve that gives meaning to the technical details. Peter understands now, with a clarity born of tragedy and guilt, that Uncle Ben's words about power and responsibility were not abstract philosophy or general life advice, but specific guidance meant for him, a prediction of the very situation in which Peter would find himself, and the choice he would need to make. With great power comes great responsibility, and Peter has great power, power that he did not seek or earn, but which has been given to him nonetheless through the accident of a radioactive spider's bite. That power creates responsibility whether Peter wants it or not, whether he finds it convenient or burdensome, whether it brings him happiness or pain. The responsibility is simply there, inherent in the power itself. And Peter's only choice is whether to accept it or to fail in the way he failed when he let the burglar escape, in the way that led directly to Uncle Ben's death. The memory of that failure, the knowledge of what his shirking of responsibility cost him, creates a determination in Peter that runs deeper than emotion or logic, a commitment that exists at the level of identity and self-definition. He will be responsible because the alternative is unthinkable. Because he has learned what happens when power is used selfishly, or not used at all. Because he cannot honour Uncle Ben's memory or live with himself if he does not dedicate his abilities to the purpose that Ben tried to teach him before tragedy made the lesson unavoidable. As dawn breaks over Queens and light begins to filter through Peter's bedroom window, he rises from his bed with red eyes and an aching heart, but also with a clarity of purpose that he has never possessed before. Uncle Ben is gone, stolen by violence and randomness, and Peter's own failure to understand his responsibilities, but the lessons Ben taught and the values he embodied remain. Carried forward by the nephew who loved him and who failed him, and who has now committed himself to ensuring that the failure leads not to more tragedy, but to meaning, not to despair, but to purpose, not to the end of heroism, but to its true beginning. The boy who was bitten by a radioactive spider and gained amazing abilities has been transformed again, not by science this time, but by grief and guilt, and the terrible wisdom that comes from understanding too late what should have been obvious from the beginning. Spider-Man exists because Peter Parker has powers that ordinary people do not possess, but Spider-Man becomes a hero because Peter Parker has learned through the hardest possible lesson that those powers create responsibilities that cannot be ignored or evaded without devastating consequence, that the only way to honor the man who raised him is to accept those responsibilities fully and completely, to dedicate his life to preventing the kind of tragedies that result when those with power choose selfishness over service, personal comfort over moral obligation, their own interests over the needs of others who depend on their intervention. The funeral has ended, the casket has been lowered into the ground, the visitors have gone home and left Peter and May alone with their grief and their memories and their uncertain future. But from this ending comes a beginning, from this death comes a birth, from this terrible loss comes a commitment that will define Peter Parker's life and create a hero whose actions will save countless innocent people and inspire generations of others to understand that with great power, whoever possesses it and however they acquired it, comes great responsibility, always and inevitably and without exception. Uncle Ben's final gift to his nephew, purchased at the cost of his own life, is this understanding, and Peter's gift to Uncle Ben's memory will be a life lived in service of that understanding, a heroic mission dedicated to ensuring that power is always joined with responsibility, that capability always carries obligation, and that those who can help those in need are called to do so not by external authority, but by the simple moral truth that to possess power and to refuse to use it responsibly is to fail at the most fundamental human task of caring for one another and building a world where goodness has a fighting chance against the forces that would destroy it. The sun rises on a new day, and Peter Parker rises with it, transformed by tragedy, educated by grief, committed to responsibility, ready to begin the heroic mission that will define the rest of his life. Uncle Ben's words echo in his mind, and will continue to echo through every decision he makes, every danger he faces, every life he saves, the simple truth that contains all the wisdom a hero needs. With great power comes great responsibility. The lesson has been learned, the price has been paid, the hero has been born, and the web of fate that connects all things begins to spin in new patterns, carrying Peter Parker forward into a future where his grief will be transformed into purpose, his guilt into determination, and his terrible failure into the foundation of a heroic legacy that will prove that even the darkest tragedy can give birth to light, that even the heaviest burden can be carried with grace, and that even the most painful lesson can become the source of wisdom that changes not just one life, but countless lives, spreading outward like ripples in a pond, like strands of a web connecting all things, like the unstoppable forward motion of a boy becoming a man becoming a hero, and a hero dedicating himself to ensuring that Uncle Ben's death and the terrible lesson it taught will never be forgotten and never be in vain. The weeks following Uncle Ben's funeral pass in a strange duality of experience for Peter Parker, his days occupied with the routines of school and home life, the necessary continuation of ordinary existence despite the extraordinary loss that has reshaped his inner world, while his nights become something entirely different, a secret life of patrol and practice, of learning to be the hero that his guilt and his commitment have called him to become. The transition from grieving nephew to nighttime vigilante happens gradually, almost organically, as Peter discovers that action provides relief from the paralysis of grief, that using his abilities in service of others creates meaning that pure mourning cannot generate, that the exhaustion of physical effort helps him sleep when emotional pain would otherwise keep him awake and circling through endless loops of regret and self-recrimination. The first night that Peter ventures out as Spider-Man with the intention of preventing crime rather than seeking vengeance, he does so with little planning or preparation, simply pulling on his crude costume and slipping out of the house after May has gone to bed. moving through the familiar streets of Queens with enhanced senses alert for any sign of trouble or danger. The neighbourhood is quiet in the late evening hours, most families settled in for the night, the occasional car passing through, but nothing suggesting criminal activity or situations requiring intervention. Peter climbs to the roof of an apartment building and sits looking out over the borough, feeling simultaneously purposeful and foolish. Committed to his mission but uncertain about how exactly to accomplish it, aware that crime does not announce itself conveniently, and that finding situations where his help is needed will require more than simply wandering around hoping to stumble upon robberies in progress. The education that Peter receives during these early nights of patrol comes through trial and error, through mistakes and small successes, through the gradual accumulation of experience that teaches him how to be effective as a crime fighter, rather than simply well-intentioned. He learns to position himself on rooftops and fire escapes, where his enhanced hearing can pick up sounds from multiple directions, to listen for the particular tones and patterns that suggest conflict or distress, to distinguish between the normal noise of urban life and the specific sounds that indicate someone needs help. He learns that his spider sense, while invaluable for warning him of personal danger, does not alert him to crimes happening nearby unless those crimes somehow threaten him directly, meaning that he must rely on his other enhanced senses and his growing understanding of where and when criminal activity is most likely to occur. The first crime that Peter successfully prevents as the new, responsible Spider-Man happens, almost by accident during his third night of patrol. When his enhanced hearing picks up the sound of breaking glass from an alley several blocks away, followed by voices raised in anger and fear, Peter swings toward the sound with his crude web shooters, the homemade devices that he designed and built using his scientific knowledge and whatever materials he could afford or scavenge. Mechanical marvels that allow him to shoot strands of artificial webbing strong enough to support his weight and sticky enough to adhere to almost any surface. The web slinging is still new enough to feel exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure, the sensation of swinging through the air between buildings requiring trust in his own abilities and in the strength of the webbing. The speed and height creating an adrenaline rush that temporarily pushes aside grief and guilt. The scene that Peter finds when he arrives at the alley is straightforward and unambiguous. A young woman being threatened by two men who have apparently followed her from the subway station, their intentions clear from their aggressive postures and their crude suggestions. The woman backed against a wall with nowhere to run and no help visible in the quiet residential street. Peter's intervention is swift and decisive, his enhanced strength and reflexes making the confrontation almost embarrassingly one-sided. The two would-be attackers finding themselves webbed to the alley wall before they fully register that someone has appeared to interfere with their plans. The woman stares at Peter with wide eyes, uncertain whether to be grateful or frightened by this masked figure who has appeared from nowhere and demonstrated abilities that seem impossible. And Peter realizes that he has not thought about how to present himself, what to say, or how to explain his presence and his actions. The words that come out of Peter's mouth surprise him with their lightness and humour. A joke about the attackers being stuck around for a while, a quip about them needing to reflect on their life choices while they hang on the wall. The humour is instinctive, a defence mechanism that helps Peter cope with the intensity of the situation and the lingering trauma of Uncle Ben's death, a way of maintaining emotional distance from the violence he's preventing and the fear he's witnessing. The woman laughs nervously, the sound breaking the tension, and she thanks him with genuine gratitude before hurrying away toward the safety of her home, leaving Peter alone with the webbed criminals and the knowledge that he has just done something genuinely good, has used his powers to prevent harm rather than to seek profit or revenge, has fulfilled the responsibility that his abilities create. The feeling that washes over Peter in the aftermath of this first successful intervention is complex and multi-layered, combining satisfaction and validation with an awareness of how much more needs to be done, how many other crimes are happening throughout the city even as he celebrates this single small victory. The two men he has webbed to the wall are cursing and struggling, demanding to be released and threatening revenge, and Peter must make a decision about what to do with them, whether to wait for police to arrive or simply leave them secured and trust that someone will eventually call the authorities. The decision he makes to swing away after calling in an anonymous tip from a nearby payphone establishes a pattern that will characterize much of his early crime fighting, an approach that prioritizes stopping crimes in progress over seeking credit or recognition, that values effectiveness and safety over public acclaim or official acknowledgement. The costume that Peter wears during these early patrols proves increasingly inadequate for serious crime fighting, the homemade outfit lacking both the durability and the functionality that his activities require. The red shirt with its marker-drawn spiderweb pattern becomes torn and stained. The simple mask provides insufficient protection for his identity, and the whole ensemble looks amateurish and slightly ridiculous, more appropriate for a Halloween party than for confronting dangerous criminals. Peter begins to plan and design a new costume, something that will be both more protective and more professional, that will inspire confidence rather than mockery, that will establish Spider-Man as a serious hero rather than a peculiar oddity or a publicity-seeking performer. The design process occupies Peter's thoughts during his daytime hours, providing a focus for his scientific and creative energies that offers relief from the constant weight of grief and guilt. He sketches variations and considers materials, thinking about colours and symbols and the practical requirements of a suit that must allow freedom of movement, while also providing some protection against weapons and impacts. The red and blue colour scheme from his original costume appeals to him for reasons he cannot fully articulate. Something about the combination feeling right and appropriate, heroic without being pompous, distinctive without being garish. The spider symbol that he places on the chest is both literal, representing the source of his powers, and metaphorical, suggesting the web of connections and responsibilities that defines his mission. The new costume that Peter eventually creates, working in secret in his bedroom during late-night hours when May is asleep, represents a significant upgrade from his original amateur effort, though it remains homemade and constructed from materials that are affordable rather than ideal. The base suit is fashioned from spandex and other stretchy fabrics, purchased from theatrical supply stores, chosen for their flexibility and durability, dyed in bright red and blue that will make him visible and recognizable. The webbing pattern is carefully painted on rather than drawn with marker, the lines precise and intentional, creating a visual effect that is both striking and professional. The mask covers his entire head, with large white eyepieces that serve both to protect his identity completely and to create an expressive element that makes his masked face more readable and less intimidating, though Peter does not yet understand the psychological importance of this design choice. The web shooters that Peter designs and builds represent perhaps his greatest technical achievement. Devices that combine mechanical precision with chemical innovation, allowing him to produce strong, flexible webbing on demand without relying on any biological web spinning capability. The decision to create mechanical web shooters rather than developing organic ones, assuming such a thing were even possible, reflects Peter's scientific mindset and his preference for technology he can understand and control. The web fluid formula that he develops through experimentation is a marvel of amateur chemistry, a liquid that transforms into solid strands upon exposure to air, strong enough to hold tremendous weight but designed to dissolve harmlessly after approximately 1 hour, ensuring that the city is not permanently covered in webbing, and that criminals he captures are eventually freed even if police do not arrive immediately. The construction of the web shooters requires Peter to steal moments in the school's science lab, using equipment and materials that he cannot afford to purchase himself, a small ethical compromise that troubles him, but which seems justified by the larger mission the devices will serve. He tells himself that he is borrowing rather than stealing, that he will someday repay the school for the resources he uses, but the rationalization feels thin and uncomfortable. A reminder that even heroic missions can require moral compromises, and that absolute purity of action may be impossible in the complicated real world, where good intentions must be implemented through imperfect means. The nights of patrol continue and accumulate, each one adding to Peter's education in the realities of crime and urban danger, teaching him about the city he is committed to protect and the various forms that evil and desperation can take. He stops muggings and prevents burglaries, interrupts domestic violence, and intervenes in gang confrontations, using his enhanced abilities to insert himself into situations that would be deadly for an ordinary person, but which his spider powers allow him to handle with relative safety. The crimes he encounters range from the petty and opportunistic to the genuinely dangerous and disturbing, and each intervention teaches him something about human nature, about the circumstances that lead people to harm others, about the complex mixture of malice and desperation that drives criminal behaviour. Not all of Peter's interventions go smoothly, or end with clean victories and grateful victims. Some criminals fight back more effectively than he expects, weapons and numbers sometimes creating genuine danger despite his enhanced abilities. Some victims respond to his help with fear or suspicion rather than gratitude, uncertain about this masked vigilante who appears from nowhere and demonstrates powers that seem supernatural. Some situations prove more complex than they initially appear. Conflicts where the lines between victim and aggressor are blurred, where Peter's intervention might make things worse rather than better, where the right action is unclear and uncertain. The mistakes that Peter makes during these early weeks of crime fighting teach him humility and caution, reminding him that good intentions do not guarantee good outcomes, and that even enhanced abilities do not eliminate the need for judgment and wisdom. He webs an innocent man who he mistakenly believes is assaulting a woman, only to discover that he was actually defending her from someone else, an error that leaves Peter mortified and more careful about assessing situations before intervening. He arrives too late to prevent a robbery, finding only the aftermath and victims who needed help minutes earlier, when he was blocks away dealing with a different crime, the limitation of being only one person teaching him that he cannot be everywhere at once, and that some tragedies will occur despite his best efforts. The physical toll of his nightly patrols begins to affect Peter's daytime life, in ways that become increasingly difficult to hide from May and from his teachers. He arrives at school exhausted, having spent the previous night swinging through the city and stopping crimes, his enhanced metabolism requiring enormous amounts of food to fuel his activities, but his limited budget making it difficult to eat enough to satisfy his hunger. He falls asleep in class, struggling to keep his eyes open during lectures, his grades beginning to slip for the first time in his academic career, as heroic responsibilities consume the time and energy he would normally devote to studying and homework. May notices the changes in Peter and worries about him, attributing his exhaustion and distraction to grief over Uncle Ben's death. Her concern manifesting in extra care and attention, offers of his favourite foods and gentle encouragement to talk about his feelings. Peter accepts her care while hiding the truth about what is really occupying his time and energy, the deception feeling like another betrayal even though he knows that revealing his secret identity would put her at risk and burden her with knowledge she's better off not having. The guilt of lying to May, especially now when she has lost her husband and deserves honesty from the only family she has left, adds another layer to the weight that Peter carries, but he tells himself that this deception is necessary, that protecting her from the truth is itself an act of love and responsibility. The reaction of the New York City Police Department to the appearance of Spider-Man varies, depending on individual officers and their attitudes toward vigilante justice, some viewing him as a helpful ally who stops crimes that police cannot prevent, others seeing him as a dangerous interference with proper law enforcement procedures and a potential criminal himself. The first time that Peter encounters police at a crime scene, officers arriving while he is still present and questioning his authority to intervene, he realizes that his relationship with official law enforcement will be complicated and potentially antagonistic, that he cannot count on automatic cooperation or gratitude from the people whose job he is ostensibly helping to perform. The officer who confronts Peter at that first encounter is a veteran cop with a skeptical expression and a hand resting warily on his weapon, demanding to know who Spider-Man is and what gives him the right to take the law into his own hands, to apprehend criminals without badge or authority, to operate outside the established system of justice. Peter's response is improvisational and imperfect, an explanation that he is simply trying to help, that he has abilities that allow him to prevent crimes that might otherwise succeed, that he means no disrespect to police but recognizes that one person with special powers can sometimes intervene more quickly than officers who must follow protocols and respond to radio calls. The officer is not entirely convinced, but the presence of webbed criminals and relieved victims makes it difficult to argue that Spider-Man's intervention has caused harm, and the encounter ends with a warning that vigilante activity is not legal or welcome, and that cooperation with proper authorities would be appreciated if Spider-Man insists on continuing his activities. The ambiguity of Spider-Man's legal status troubles Peter less than it perhaps should, his focus on preventing harm and saving lives making questions about proper authority and official procedures seem less important than results, less significant than the concrete good he accomplishes by stopping crimes in progress. He tells himself that if police could prevent all crimes and protect all victims, his intervention would not be necessary. But the reality is that police resources are limited and criminals are numerous, that the city contains more danger than official law enforcement can handle, that his unique abilities allow him to fill gaps that would otherwise remain open and vulnerable. The rationalization is not entirely comfortable, but it allows Peter to continue his mission despite official ambivalence and occasional hostility. The media attention that Spider-Man begins to attract is both gratifying and troubling. Newspaper articles and television reports discussing the mysterious masked vigilante who's been appearing at crime scenes and demonstrating abilities that seem to defy normal human limitations. Some coverage is positive and admiring, portraying Spider-Man as a hero who risks his own safety to protect innocent people, celebrating his interventions and calling for official recognition or cooperation. Other coverage is suspicious and critical, questioning his motives and methods, suggesting that he might be seeking publicity or operating with hidden agendas, wondering whether someone who hides his identity can be trusted, and whether his vigilante activities set a dangerous precedent for lawlessness dressed up as heroism. The journalist who becomes Spider-Man's most vocal and persistent critic is Jay. Jonah Jameson, publisher of the Daily Bugle newspaper, whose editorials attacking the masked wall-crawler begin appearing within weeks of Spider-Man's first public appearances. Jameson's criticisms focus on the danger of vigilante justice, the arrogance of someone who takes the law into his own hands, the potential for abuse when power is exercised without accountability or oversight. The publisher's rhetoric is inflammatory and often hyperbolic, suggesting that Spider-Man might be in league with the criminals he claims to fight, that his interventions might be staged for publicity, that his mask hides not just his identity, but nefarious intentions that the public should fear rather than celebrate. Peter reads these editorials with a mixture of hurt and anger, unable to respond or defend himself without revealing his identity, frustrated by the unfairness of being attacked for actions that are motivated by genuine desire to help others and prevent the kind of tragedy that took Uncle Ben's life. The criticism stings more than Peter wants to admit, touching on his own doubts and insecurities, raising questions about whether he's truly helping or simply indulging his own ego and need for validation. The knowledge that some people view him as a menace rather than a hero creates a psychological burden that adds to the physical exhaustion and emotional toll of his nightly patrols, making the heroic mission feel more complicated and less purely righteous than it did in the first flush of commitment following Uncle Ben's death. But despite the criticism and the complications, despite the exhaustion and the deception and the mistakes, Peter continues his patrols and his interventions. Driven by the commitment he made in those dark hours after Uncle Ben's funeral, motivated by the understanding that with great power comes great responsibility, and that his spider-enhanced abilities create obligations he cannot ignore or evade. Each crime he prevents, each victim he saves, each criminal he stops represents a small payment on the debt he incurred through his earlier failure, an incremental attempt to balance the scales and ensure that his powers are used as they should have been from the beginning, in service of others rather than in service of himself. The gradual improvement in Peter's crime-fighting skills and effectiveness comes through practice and persistence, through learning from mistakes and adapting his methods based on experience. He becomes better at reading situations quickly, at distinguishing between genuine emergencies and conflicts that do not require his intervention, at using his enhanced abilities more efficiently and strategically. His web-slinging improves, the movements becoming more natural and automatic, allowing him to traverse the city with increasing speed and confidence. His spider sense becomes more refined, the warnings it provides more nuanced and informative, helping him anticipate dangers and respond to threats with greater precision. The relationship between Peter Parker and Spider-Man begins to feel less like a simple division between secret identity and heroic alter ego, and more like two aspects of a single complicated existence, each informing and affecting the other in ways both obvious and subtle. The confidence that Peter gains from his success as Spider-Man begins to manifest in his daytime life, making him slightly less awkward and uncertain in social situations, though he remains fundamentally the same shy science student he has always been. The exhaustion and injuries from his nighttime activities affect his performance in school and his interactions with May, creating complications that require constant management and careful deception. The nights when Peter returns home bruised and battered from particularly difficult confrontations with criminals require elaborate explanations or careful concealment, Peter learning to hide injuries from May's concerned attention, to dismiss cuts and bruises as results of clumsiness or accidents at school, to ice swelling and treat wounds in the privacy of his bedroom where his aunt cannot see the evidence of his dangerous activities. The enhanced healing that came with his spider powers helps minimize the lasting damage from these injuries, cuts closing faster than normal and bruises fading within days, but the immediate aftermath of violent confrontations still leaves marks that must be explained or hidden. The money that Peter earned from his brief career as a wrestling performer and television personality sits hidden in his room, untouched and increasingly irrelevant to his current mission. The funds that once represented opportunity and financial security now feeling tainted by the selfish motivations that led to their accumulation. Peter considers giving the money to May, revealing at least this much of his secret to help with household expenses, but the difficulty of explaining where it came from without raising questions about his activities prevents him from taking that step. Instead, the money remains hidden, a reminder of who he was before Uncle Ben's death and the dramatic transformation that tragedy forced upon him. The weeks turn into months, winter giving way to early spring, and Peter's dual life becomes increasingly routine and established, the pattern of school during the day and patrol at night creating a rhythm that feels sustainable, even as it pushes him to the limits of his enhanced endurance. The transformation from grieving boy to committed hero is not complete or perfect. Moments of doubt and exhaustion and grief still breaking through his determination, but the direction is clear and irreversible. Peter Parker has become Spider-Man in more than just name or costume, has internalized the responsibility that his powers create, has dedicated himself to a mission that will define the rest of his life and create a legacy that extends far beyond his own existence. Uncle Ben's words continue to echo through Peter's thoughts during his patrols and his interventions, the simple truth about power and responsibility serving as both motivation and measuring stick, the standard against which Peter evaluates every choice and action. With great power comes great responsibility, and Peter has learned this lesson as thoroughly as any lesson has ever been learned, has paid for this understanding with the life of the man who tried to teach it to him before experience made the teaching unavoidable. The knowledge that Ben would be proud of what Peter is doing, of how he is using his abilities and the values he's upholding, provides comfort during difficult moments and strength during times of doubt. The sense of honouring Uncle Ben's memory making the sacrifices and struggles feel worthwhile and meaningful. The boy who was bitten by a radioactive spider and gained amazing powers has become the man who understands what those powers demand of him, has transformed grief and guilt into purpose and commitment, has learned through the hardest possible lesson that ability creates obligation, and that those who can help those in need are called to do so not by external authority, but by the fundamental moral truth that we are all connected, all responsible for one another, all participants in the web of human relationship that makes civilization possible and gives meaning to individual existence. Spider-Man exists because Peter Parker failed to be Spider-Man when it mattered most, and that failure will never be forgotten or forgiven, but it can be redeemed through action, through dedication, through the daily choice to use power responsibly and to honour the memory of a good man whose death taught what his life could not. The spring of 1963 brings with it a gradual softening of the acute grief that has dominated the Parker household since Uncle Ben's death. Not a forgetting or a moving past, but rather a transformation of raw anguish into something more bearable. A permanent ache that can coexist with the continuation of ordinary life rather than paralysing all forward motion. May emerges from her most intense mourning with a quiet strength that surprises Peter, her resilience revealing depths of character that he has always sensed but never fully appreciated. Her ability to find reasons to continue living and caring for her nephew even in the absence of her life partner, demonstrating the kind of courage that requires no enhanced abilities or dramatic gestures. Just the daily choice to get out of bed and face another day without the person who made all previous days meaningful. The financial pressures that Ben's death creates become increasingly apparent as the months pass. The loss of his income leaving May to support the household on her own modest earnings from the part-time work she has always done, supplemented now by social security benefits that help but do not fully replace what has been lost. Peter watches his aunt struggle with bills and worry about expenses, sees her make small sacrifices and economies that she tries to hide from him, and the guilt he feels about possessing money he cannot reveal or explain adds another layer to the complicated web of deception that his double life requires. He begins looking for legitimate work that he can do after school and on weekends, employment that will allow him to contribute to the household finances without raising questions about sudden wealth or unexplained absences. Though finding jobs that accommodate his unpredictable schedule and his need to be available for Spider-Man emergencies proves challenging, the opportunity that eventually presents itself comes from an unexpected source. J. Jonah Jameson's Daily Bugle newspaper, the very publication that has been most critical of Spider-Man's vigilante activities, attacking the masked hero with editorials that question his motives and methods and calling for his arrest or at least official regulation. Peter has been considering various ways to make money from his Spider-Man activities without returning to the performance and entertainment work that characterized his early use of his powers, seeking something that feels more aligned with his current mission and values. When the idea occurs to him that photographs of Spider-Man in action might have commercial value to newspapers and magazines that want to illustrate their coverage of the mysterious wall crawler's activities. The technical challenge of photographing himself while fighting criminals or swinging through the city requires Peter to develop an ingenious system using small automatic cameras that he can position at crime scenes before engaging with criminals, devices equipped with timers and motion sensors that will capture images without requiring Peter's direct attention during the action. The cameras themselves are modified from cheap models purchased at pawn shops, enhanced with Peter's scientific knowledge to make them more reliable and capable of functioning in the difficult conditions of nighttime crime scenes and fast-paced action sequences. The setup requires Peter to think strategically about positioning and timing, to choreograph his movements during fights to ensure that he passes through the camera's fields of view at moments that will produce dramatic and publishable images. The first batch of Spider-Man photographs that Peter brings to the Daily Bugle offices is the result of weeks of experimentation and practice. Images that capture the masked hero in dynamic poses, swinging between buildings, confronting criminals, demonstrating his abilities in ways that are both spectacular and authentic. Peter approaches the newspaper's offices with considerable nervousness, uncertain how his work will be received and worried that trying to sell photographs of Spider-Man might somehow seem suspicious or raise questions about how a random teenage photographer managed to get such remarkable access to the elusive hero. The receptionist directs him to the photography editor, a tired-looking man named Robbie Robertson, who examines the prints with professional interest and increasing approval, his experienced eye recognizing the quality and newsworthiness of the images, despite their amateur technical qualities. Robertson asks the questions that Peter is prepared for, wanting to know how he managed to capture these photographs, whether he has some relationship with Spider-Man or simply got lucky, whether he can reliably produce more images of similar quality. Peter's cover story, carefully rehearsed, explains that he has been following Spider-Man's activities as a hobby, using his knowledge of crime patterns and police radio calls to position himself where the hero is likely to appear, that his success is the result of persistence and good timing rather than any inside information or special access. The explanation seems to satisfy Robertson, who is more interested in the photographs themselves than in the complicated questions of how they were obtained. And he offers Peter a price for the images that seems generous, more money than Peter has ever earned through legitimate work and payment that comes with the promise of future purchases if Peter can continue producing material of similar quality. The moment when Peter accepts Robertson's offer and receives payment for his Spider-Man photographs feels both triumphant and slightly troubling, a validation of his resourcefulness and creativity, but also a reminder of the complicated ethics of profiting from his own heroic activities, even indirectly through photographic documentation. The money will help May with household expenses, will ease some of the financial pressure that has been building since Uncle Ben's death. But Peter cannot shake the uncomfortable awareness that he is essentially selling images of himself, that the arrangement has elements of the self-promotion and profit-seeking that characterized his earlier use of his powers for wrestling and television performances. He resolves to think of the photography work as documentation rather than exploitation, a way of creating a visual record of Spider-Man's activities that serves the public interest, while also generating income that he can use to help his family. A rationalization that feels more comfortable than acknowledging the fundamental strangeness of his position. The regular income from selling Spider-Man photographs to the Daily Bugle provides Peter with a legitimate explanation for having money to contribute to household expenses, a cover story that allows him to help May without revealing the existence of his hidden wrestling earnings, or raising questions about how a teenage student could afford to supplement the family budget. May's relief and gratitude when Peter explains that he has found work as a freelance photographer, that a newspaper is buying his pictures and paying him decent rates, is touching and heartbreaking in equal measure. Her pride in his initiative and resourcefulness mixing with worry that he is taking on too much responsibility too young, that he should be focusing on his education and his future rather than trying to support the household. Peter assures her that the photography work does not interfere with his studies, that he enjoys the creative challenge and the opportunity to develop skills that might prove valuable in his future career, lies that feel justified by the genuine good they accomplish in easing her worry and her financial stress. The irony of Peter's situation, selling photographs of Spider-Man to a newspaper whose publisher despises the masked hero and regularly publishes editorials attacking him as a menace to society, is not lost on him, creating a twisted sort of humour that helps him cope with the absurdity of his double life. Each time he delivers a new batch of photographs to the Bugle, he imagines Jameson's reaction to the images. The publisher's frustration at needing to purchase and publish pictures of someone he considers a threat and a fraud, using those very images to illustrate articles and editorials criticizing the subject they depict. The arrangement creates a strange dependency where Jameson needs Spider-Man photographs to sell newspapers and drive his anti-Spider-Man crusade, while Peter needs Jameson's newspaper to purchase his photographs and provide income. A symbiotic relationship built on mutual antagonism and opposed interests. Peter's first meeting with J. Jonah Jameson himself occurs when Robertson brings him upstairs to the publisher's office to discuss a particularly spectacular set of photographs showing Spider-Man preventing a construction site accident. Images that Jameson wants to feature prominently in the next day's edition despite his personal feelings about their subject. The publisher is exactly what Peter expected from reading his editorials. A bombastic and opinionated man with a thick moustache and an ego that fills the room. Someone who speaks in declarative statements and rhetorical questions, who seems incapable of expressing uncertainty or acknowledging complexity in any situation. Jameson examines Peter's photographs with a critical eye, grudgingly admitting that they are good work, excellent composition, and timing. Then immediately launching into a rant about how Spider-Man is probably staging these dramatic rescues for publicity. How the whole web-slinging vigilante act is a fraud designed to make the masked menace look heroic, when in reality he is probably working with criminals and creating the very dangers he pretends to prevent. Peter listens to this tirade with carefully controlled expression, biting his tongue to prevent defensive responses that would be inappropriate and potentially suspicious, forcing himself to nod politely while Jameson attacks the character and motives of Peter's alter ego with creative venom. The publisher's paranoid theories about Spider-Man's true nature and hidden agendas are both absurd and somewhat hurtful. Attacks on Peter's integrity and intentions that sting despite coming from someone who knows nothing about the truth, whose criticism is based entirely on prejudice and suspicion rather than actual knowledge of Spider-Man's motivations or activities. The experience teaches Peter an important lesson about public perception and the impossibility of controlling how his actions will be interpreted. The understanding that no matter how pure his intentions or how heroic his deeds, some people will always find reasons to doubt and criticize, to see darkness where there is light and selfishness where there is sacrifice. Jameson concludes his rant by offering Peter a regular freelance arrangement, a standing agreement to purchase any good Spider-Man photographs that Peter can provide, with rates that vary based on the quality and newsworthiness of the images. The publisher makes clear that he is not endorsing Spider-Man or changing his opinion about the masked menace, but that his newspaper has a responsibility to document what is happening in the city, and that Peter's photographs serve that purpose effectively, regardless of Jameson's personal feelings about their subject. Peter accepts the arrangement with appropriate gratitude, hiding his mixed feelings about working for someone who uses his photographs to attack and undermine the very heroism they document. Telling himself that Jameson's opinions do not change the value of the work Peter is doing as Spider-Man, and that the income will help May, which is what truly matters. The routine that develops over the following months, Peter balancing his roles as student, nephew, photographer, and superhero, requires careful management and constant vigilance, each aspect of his life demanding attention and energy, while also creating potential conflicts with the other aspects. His schoolwork suffers somewhat from the time and energy devoted to his nighttime patrols and his photography activities, his grades remaining good but no longer exceptional, the straight A's that once came easily now requiring more effort than he can consistently provide given his divided attention. His teachers notice the change and express concern, suggesting that he seems distracted or tired, asking if everything's all right at home after the tragedy of his uncle's death, offering help and support that Peter appreciates but cannot truly accept, because the real source of his struggles cannot be revealed. Flash Thompson's bullying continues but with less intensity and conviction than before, the dynamic between them having shifted subtly since Peter's display of unexpected strength in the hallway months ago. Flash apparently uncertain about whether Peter remains a safe target for harassment, or might respond again with surprising physical capability. The other students who once ignored Peter now pay slightly more attention, not enough to include him in their social circles, but enough to acknowledge his existence and occasionally speak to him in hallways or classrooms. Small changes that suggest some shift in how he is perceived, even though Peter himself feels fundamentally the same. Still the awkward science nerd who does not quite fit into the social ecosystem of high school. The approach of Peter's 16th birthday in August brings with it a mixture of emotions, the milestone representing both normal teenage development and a painful reminder of Uncle Ben's absence, the knowledge that this will be the first birthday Peter celebrates without his uncle's presence, creating an ache that no amount of heroic activity can fully soothe. May makes plans for a small celebration despite their limited budget. Determined to mark the occasion and create some joy in their lives even while grieving. Her commitment to maintaining family traditions and creating positive memories, demonstrating the strength and love that define her character. Peter appreciates her efforts while also feeling guilty about the secrets he keeps from her, the vast areas of his life that she knows nothing about, the dangers he faces every night while she sleeps unaware in the next room. The birthday celebration itself is quiet and intimate, just Peter and May sharing a homemade cake and a few simple gifts, the modest scale of the event reflecting their financial situation but also creating a warmth and authenticity that more elaborate celebrations might lack. May gives Peter a camera. Not an expensive professional model, but a decent amateur device that will be genuinely useful for his legitimate photography work. The gift showing that she has been paying attention to his stated interests and wants to support his development, even when money is tight. The thoughtfulness of the present touches Peter deeply, the knowledge that May sacrificed to purchase something nice for him, making the simple camera feel precious beyond its monetary value. A symbol of her love and her faith in his future. Peter's gift to himself, though he does not think of it consciously in these terms, is a refinement and improvement of his Spider-Man costume. The homemade outfit that has served him for these first months of crime fighting finally being replaced with a more professional and functional design. The new costume, still created by Peter's own hands but benefiting from months of experience and feedback about what works and what needs improvement, represents a significant upgrade in both appearance and capability. The fabric is more durable, chosen specifically for its resistance to tearing and its ability to withstand the stresses of web-slinging and combat. The colours more vibrant and carefully applied. The whole ensemble looking genuinely heroic rather than amateurish or makeshift. The mask in particular receives careful attention, Peter designing eyepieces that are both expressive and practical, large white shapes that create a distinctive visual signature, while also allowing him excellent peripheral vision and protection for his eyes. The webbing pattern that covers the suit is no longer hand-drawn but carefully sewn, the lines precise and consistent, creating a visual effect that is both striking and professional, making Spider-Man look like a serious hero rather than a person playing at heroism. The web shooters are also refined and improved, made more reliable and easier to reload, the mechanical devices now hidden under fabric sleeves that conceal them while still allowing quick access when needed. The first night that Peter wears the new costume on patrol, swinging through the city in his improved outfit, he feels a surge of confidence and pride that goes beyond mere vanity, a sense that he is growing into his role and his mission, that Spider-Man is becoming a legitimate hero rather than just a guilt-driven teenager trying to make amends for past failures. The costume helps establish his identity and his presence in the city, makes him more recognizable and distinctive, transforms him from an oddity or curiosity into someone who looks the part of a hero and can be taken seriously by both criminals and citizens. The psychological impact of the improved costume, both on Peter himself and on the people who encounter Spider-Man, proves significant and lasting, creating a visual brand and identity that will become iconic and immediately recognizable. The crimes that Peter encounters and prevents during this period begin to escalate in complexity and danger, moving beyond simple muggings and burglaries to situations that involve more organized criminal activity, more sophisticated planning, more dangerous weapons, and more violent intentions. The learning curve remains steep, each new type of crime requiring Peter to adapt his tactics and develop new skills, to understand the patterns and methods that different types of criminals employ, to recognize warning signs and indicators that distinguish various criminal enterprises and threat levels. He learns about drug dealing and illegal gambling, about protection rackets and loan sharking, about the ecosystem of organized crime that exists beneath the surface of ordinary city life. A shadow economy of violence and exploitation that preys on the vulnerable and enriches the ruthless. The realization that his nightly patrols can only address a tiny fraction of the criminal activity occurring throughout New York City is both sobering and frustrating, teaching Peter the limits of individual action and the reality that one person, no matter how capable or dedicated, cannot solve systemic problems or prevent all harm. The knowledge that crimes are happening even as he stops other crimes, that people are being victimized while he swings past their location towards some other emergency, creates a constant low-level anxiety that he learns to manage but never fully overcomes. An awareness that his best efforts will never be enough to protect everyone who needs protection, or to create the kind of safe city that he imagines when he thinks about his mission and its ultimate goals. The first time that Peter fails to save someone despite his best efforts, arriving at a robbery in progress to find that the store owner has already been shot and is bleeding out on the floor. The emotional impact nearly breaks his resolve and his commitment to continuing as Spider-Man. He uses his phone to call for an ambulance while trying to provide first aid with his limited medical knowledge, holding pressure on the wound and speaking reassurance to the dying man whose eyes are already glazing over, whose breathing is becoming shallow and irregular, whose life is slipping away despite Peter's desperate attempts to keep him conscious and stable. The paramedics arrive and take over, their professional competence a relief even as Peter knows from their expressions that the outcome is likely already determined, that the wound is too severe and too much time has passed for medical intervention to make a difference. Peter watches from a nearby rooftop as the ambulance pulls away with lights flashing and siren wailing, and he sits alone in the darkness feeling the weight of this failure, this reminder that enhanced abilities do not guarantee success, and that sometimes even the fastest response and the best intentions cannot prevent tragedy. The man dies before reaching the hospital, Peter learns from news reports the following day, leaving behind a wife and 2 young children, another family destroyed by random violence, another set of people who will now navigate life without someone they loved and depended on, another loss that Peter could not prevent despite possessing powers that should have been enough to make a difference. The guilt that this failure creates is different from the guilt surrounding Uncle Ben's death, less personal and direct, but still painful and significant. A reminder that Peter's mission to prevent others from experiencing the kind of loss his family suffered cannot succeed completely, that some tragedies will occur regardless of his vigilance and dedication. The temptation to quit, to abandon the Spider-Man identity and retreat into normal teenage life, is strong in the aftermath of this failure. The question of whether his efforts are worth the cost and the pain rising up with renewed urgency. But even as Peter considers giving up, he recognizes that abandoning his mission would mean that all future preventable tragedies would go unprevented, that the crimes he could stop would succeed if he chooses not to act, that his failure to save one person does not negate his responsibility to try to save others. The decision to continue despite this failure and the emotional toll it takes represents a maturing of Peter's understanding of heroism and responsibility, a recognition that being Spider-Man means accepting both successes and failures, both the satisfaction of lives saved and the grief of lives lost, both the moments of triumph and the experiences of inadequacy. Uncle Ben's words about power and responsibility take on new dimensions in light of this understanding. The lesson expanding beyond the simple recognition that capability creates obligation to include the harder truth, that obligation continues even when success is not guaranteed, that responsibility means trying even when failure is possible or perhaps inevitable, that the only true failure would be choosing not to try at all. The support system that Peter builds around his Spider-Man identity during this period consists primarily of the relationships and resources that already exist in his life, adapted and utilized in ways that serve his heroic mission without revealing his secret. His scientific knowledge, developed through years of study and natural aptitude, becomes a crucial tool for solving problems and developing equipment that enhances his effectiveness. His photography work creates a financial foundation that allows him to purchase materials and supplies needed for costume improvements and web shooter maintenance. His relationship with May provides emotional grounding and reminds him of what he is fighting to protect: the ordinary lives and simple happiness that criminals threaten and that heroes work to preserve. The absence of confidants or partners, the complete isolation of being the only person who knows that Peter Parker and Spider-Man are the same individual, creates a psychological burden that grows heavier over time. The weight of carrying so many secrets and living so many lies accumulating until Peter sometimes feels that the separate aspects of his life might pull him apart, that the contradictions and deceptions required to maintain his double identity might become unsustainable. The desire to tell someone, to share the burden and the truth with another person who could understand and provide support, is strong and persistent, but the risks of revelation seem too great. The potential for putting others in danger or creating complications that might interfere with his mission, outweighing the benefits of companionship and shared knowledge. The summer of Peter's 16th year passes with the established rhythm of patrol and photography, crime fighting and secret keeping, the hot nights providing cover for his activities as more people are out late and activity in the city extends further into the evening hours. The skills he has developed continue to improve through practice and experience, his web slinging becoming more fluid and natural. His combat effectiveness increasing as he learns to use his enhanced strength and reflexes more strategically, his judgment in assessing situations and deciding when and how to intervene growing more sophisticated and nuanced. The transformation from the uncertain amateur who first put on the Spider-Man costume to the capable hero who now patrols the city with confidence and competence represents genuine growth and development. The painful lessons of the past months producing someone who is more effective and more thoughtful, more capable of fulfilling the responsibilities that his powers create. As summer gives way to fall and Peter prepares to begin his junior year of high school, he looks back on the months since Uncle Ben's death with complex emotions, seeing both how far he has come and how much further he still has to go, recognizing both his achievements and his limitations. Feeling both proud of what he's accomplished as Spider-Man and aware of how much remains to be learned and done. The grief over Uncle Ben's loss has not disappeared or even significantly diminished, but it has been transformed into something that coexists with other emotions and experiences, integrated into Peter's identity rather than consuming it entirely, channeled into purpose and action rather than remaining as pure pain and regret. The Daily Bugle's coverage of Spider-Man continues to be dominated by J. Jonah Jameson's editorial crusade against the masked hero, the publisher's attacks becoming more creative and elaborate as Spider-Man's positive reputation grows and challenges Jameson's narrative about the wall crawler being a menace and a threat. Peter reads these editorials with a mixture of frustration and dark amusement, watching Jameson twist innocent actions into evidence of sinister plots. Seeing ordinary acts of heroism reinterpreted as publicity stunts, or suspicious behaviour that right-thinking citizens should question and oppose. The disconnect between what Peter knows about his own motivations and what Jameson claims about Spider-Man's intentions creates a surreal quality to the coverage, a funhouse mirror distortion that would be funny if it were not also potentially damaging to public trust and support for his mission. The irony of Peter's position, regularly visiting the Daily Bugle offices to sell photographs that Jameson will use to illustrate his anti-Spider-Man articles, never diminishes or becomes less strange, each transaction reinforcing the absurdity of the situation and the complicated ethics of profiting from documentation of his own heroic activities. Robbie Robertson, the photography editor who serves as Peter's main contact at the newspaper, treats him with professional respect and personal warmth that suggests sympathy for the young photographer and perhaps also quiet disagreement with Jameson's editorial stance, though Robertson is too diplomatic and too concerned about his job to openly contradict his employer's opinions. The relationship that develops between Peter and Robertson over these months of regular contact has a quality of mentorship and mutual respect, Robertson offering advice about photography and journalism that goes beyond the immediate commercial transactions, sharing wisdom about the profession, and encouraging Peter's obvious talent and dedication. The financial stability that Peter's photography income provides makes a significant difference in the Parker household. Easing the budget pressures that have dominated since Uncle Ben's death, and allowing May to worry slightly less about money, though she remains frugal and careful, her Depression-era upbringing making it difficult for her to spend freely even when resources permit. Peter contributes his earnings to household expenses while also carefully saving a portion for future needs, the discipline and responsibility he shows with money-earning May's approval and pride. Her comments about him becoming a man and taking on adult responsibilities, creating warm feelings mixed with guilt about the deception involved in how he earns the money and what he does with his nights. The compliments May offers about Peter's maturity and his helpfulness, her expressions of gratitude for his contributions and her relief at not having to shoulder all financial burdens alone, make Peter both happy to be helping her and sad that he cannot tell her the full truth about his life and activities. The academic year begins with Peter's return to Midtown High School for his junior year, the familiar routines of classes and homework providing structure and normalcy that balances the unpredictable chaos of his nighttime patrols, though the exhaustion from his double life makes the school day feel longer and more challenging than in previous years when he could devote his full attention and energy to his studies. His teachers notice that Peter seems tired and distracted, that his performance, while still good, lacks the excellence that previously characterized his academic work, and several of them express concern or offer extra help, attributing his struggles to the ongoing grief over his uncle's death, and wanting to provide support during what they assume is a difficult period of adjustment. Peter accepts their concern with appropriate gratitude, while knowing that the real source of his fatigue has nothing to do with grief, and everything to do with spending his nights swinging through the city and fighting criminals instead of sleeping, the moment when Gwen is assigned to be Peter's laboratory partner for a chemistry. Experiment creates an opportunity for interaction that would normally terrify Peter, his awkwardness around girls and his general social anxiety making the prospect of working closely with someone as attractive and confident as Gwen feel overwhelming and potentially humiliating. But something about Gwen's manner puts Peter at ease, her natural warmth and her obvious intelligence creating common ground that allows them to communicate about the experiment and to discover shared interests in science and learning that transcends the usual barriers of high school social hierarchy. The conversation that develops as they work together on titration and chemical reactions flows more easily than Peter expected. Gwen's questions about the school and the neighbourhood giving Peter opportunities to be helpful and knowledgeable, to demonstrate competence in ways that feel comfortable and natural rather than forced or performative. The complexity of Peter's feelings about Gwen develops gradually, mixing appreciation for her intelligence and kindness with attraction that he tries to suppress or ignore, knowing that romantic involvement would be complicated by his secrets and his responsibilities, that any relationship would necessarily be built on incomplete honesty and selective truth-telling that could ultimately only lead to pain or disappointment. The memory of Uncle Ben's death and the understanding that people close to Spider-Man might become targets for his enemies creates additional reluctance to pursue romantic possibilities. Peter's protective instincts suggesting that the safest thing for everyone he cares about is for him to maintain emotional distance and to not create attachments that could be exploited or weaponized by criminals seeking to hurt or manipulate the masked hero. But despite his caution and his reasonable concerns, Peter finds himself drawn to Gwen in ways that resist his attempts at control or suppression, her presence in his daily life becoming something he looks forward to and values, her attention and friendship providing a kind of validation and connection that he has not experienced since Uncle Ben's death, perhaps not ever experienced with someone his own age, who shares his interests and seems to appreciate rather than mock his intelligence and serious nature. The possibility that Gwen might reciprocate his attraction, that her friendliness might contain hints of romantic interest rather than merely platonic companionship, both excites and terrifies Peter, creating an emotional complication that adds to the already overwhelming complexity of maintaining his double life and balancing his various responsibilities and commitments. The villain who will test Spider-Man's abilities and determination in new ways appears without warning on a cold October evening, a figure calling himself the Vulture, who possesses the ability to fly through electromagnetic wing harness of his own design, swooping through the city's canyons and committing aerial robberies that ordinary police are helpless to prevent or pursue. The first time Peter encounters the Vulture is during a patrol when his spider sense alerts him to danger overhead, a sensation different from the usual ground-level threats that characterizes most of his crime-fighting interventions, and he looks up to see an elderly man wearing a grotesque bird-like costume soaring above the street with stolen goods clutched in mechanical talons. Moving with a speed and agility that makes pursuit challenging, even for someone with Spider-Man's enhanced abilities. The victory that Peter eventually achieves comes not through overwhelming force, but through strategic thinking, his scientific knowledge allowing him to understand the Vulture's electromagnetic flight harness well enough to identify its weaknesses and to use his web shooters to short-circuit the device, sending Toombs crashing to the ground and ending his ability to escape through flight. The criminal is webbed securely for police retrieval, and Peter swings away before official arrival creates complications, but the battle has taught him important lessons about the variety of threats he will face as Spider-Man and the need to continue developing his abilities and his tactical thinking to handle enemies who possess powers and technologies beyond normal human capabilities. But even as Peter contemplates the costs and the dangers, he recognizes that abandoning his mission is not a real option, that the responsibility he accepted after Uncle Ben's death remains as binding and urgent as it was in those first grief-stricken days of commitment and resolve, that the physical risks are simply part of what being Spider-Man means, and that accepting those risks is no different from accepting any other aspect of the obligation that his powers create. The question is not whether to continue, but how to continue more effectively, how to learn from each battle and each challenge, how to become a better and more capable hero so that the risks he takes serve their purpose of protecting others, rather than simply creating unnecessary danger for himself through inadequate preparation or insufficient skill. The winter months bring shorter days and longer nights, creating more time for patrol but also more challenging conditions. Cold temperatures and occasional snow making web slinging more difficult, and creating new hazards for both Spider-Man and the criminals he pursues. Peter learns to adjust his techniques for winter conditions, to account for ice and reduced visibility, to dress warmly enough under his costume to avoid hypothermia during long hours of patrol in freezing temperatures. The practical details of year-round crime fighting requiring adaptations and preparations that he had not previously considered. The citizens he helps during winter patrols, people threatened by criminals or endangered by accidents, or simply in need of assistance navigating difficult conditions, express gratitude that seems especially heartfelt given the obvious discomfort of being outside in such weather. Their appreciation for someone willing to suffer cold and exposure to help strangers, creating warm feelings that help compensate for the physical misery of winter patrol. The holiday season brings its own emotional complications for Peter, Christmas approaching as the first major holiday since Uncle Ben's death. The celebrations and traditions that once brought joy now shadowed by grief and absence. the empty chair at the dinner table a constant reminder of what has been lost and can never be recovered. May handles the season with quiet strength, maintaining traditions where possible, and creating new ones where necessary. Her determination to find moments of happiness, despite sorrow, teaching Peter about resilience and the importance of continuing to live even when life has been diminished by loss. The gifts they exchange are modest but thoughtful, May giving Peter a new watch to replace the one that broke months ago, Peter giving May a warm shawl that will help with her circulation during cold weather. Both presents chosen with care and given with love that transcends monetary value. The early months of 1964 bring with them a deepening of the relationships and patterns that have been developing in Peter Parker's divided life. The routines of school and heroism settling into something approaching sustainability, though the strain of maintaining his double identity continues to create challenges that require constant attention and careful management. The friendship with Gwen Stacy has evolved into something more significant and comfortable. Their conversations ranging beyond the initial common ground of academic interest to explore personal histories and future aspirations, Gwen sharing stories about her family and her father's work as a police captain, while Peter offers carefully edited versions of his own experiences, omitting the central truth about Spider-Man but trying to be as honest as possible within the constraints that his secret identity imposes. The preparation for the date occupies Peter's thoughts for the next 2 days, his concerns ranging from the practical question of what to wear and how to present himself to the deeper anxiety about whether he can successfully maintain his secret identity while pursuing a romantic relationship, whether the compartmentalization required to keep Gwen from learning about Spider-Man will create barriers to genuine intimacy, or whether he can find ways to be authentic and open in all the areas where honesty is possible, while protecting the one crucial secret that must remain hidden. The money for the date comes from his photography earnings, Peter carefully budgeting to ensure he can pay for both their movie tickets and dinner afterward, without cutting into the funds he contributes to household expenses, his desire to do this properly and to treat Gwen well motivating careful financial planning. The date itself goes better than Peter dared to hope, the movie providing entertainment and a shared experience that gives them things to talk about afterward. Their conversation over dinner flowing easily and covering topics both serious and light-hearted, Gwen's intelligence and humour making her company enjoyable in ways that go beyond mere physical attraction, though Peter cannot help noticing how beautiful she looks in the soft light of the restaurant, how her smile creates warmth that makes him forget temporarily about his responsibilities and his secrets, and the complicated realities of his double life. The evening ends with Peter walking Gwen home through the winter darkness, their conversation continuing until they reach her front door, the moment of parting creating awkwardness and anticipation, as both of them recognize that some gesture or acknowledgement of the romantic nature of their outing is expected or appropriate. The kiss that Gwen initiates, leaning in to press her lips briefly against Peter's in a gesture that is sweet and slightly tentative, sends electricity through Peter's entire body, his enhanced senses making the experience almost overwhelming in its intensity and pleasure, every detail of the contact registered with superhuman precision and burned into memory with perfect clarity. The kiss lasts only a few seconds, Gwen pulling back with a shy smile and thanking Peter for a wonderful evening, before disappearing into her house, leaving Peter standing on her doorstep feeling like he is floating, like his web-slinging abilities are suddenly unnecessary because he could simply drift home on the euphoria and happiness that fills him in the aftermath of that simple, intimate gesture. The walk home through Queens feels shorter than it actually is, Peter's mind replaying every moment of the evening, and particularly that final kiss, analysing and savouring each detail, while also beginning to worry about what comes next, how to continue developing this relationship while maintaining his secret identity. How to be the kind of boyfriend Gwen deserves while also being Spider-Man and honouring the responsibilities that his powers create. The complexity of his situation feels more acute now that romantic feelings have been acknowledged and acted upon, the stakes higher because he cares about Gwen and does not want to hurt her. the potential for pain and disappointment seeming greater because genuine emotions are involved rather than merely casual attraction or passing interest. Gwen's response to the cancellation is understanding and gracious, her concern about the supposed family emergency seeming genuine, her willingness to reschedule without complaint or resentment making Peter feel even worse about lying to her. The kindness and trust she shows making him more aware of how his deception violates that trust, even as it protects her from knowledge that might put her in danger. The pattern that this first cancellation establishes will repeat itself many times in the months and years ahead, Spider-Man's demands occasionally requiring Peter to disappoint or worry Gwen, to offer explanations that are partial truths at best and outright fabrications at worst, to create distance and confusion in a relationship that he desperately wants to be close and honest. The fundamental contradiction of trying to build genuine connection while maintaining a secret identity proving as difficult and painful as Peter feared it would be. The spring of 1964 brings warmer weather and longer days that extend Peter's patrol hours and increase his opportunities to intervene in criminal activities. The seasonal change also bringing new challenges as criminals adapt their tactics to take advantage of outdoor crowds and increased foot traffic in the city's commercial and entertainment districts. The crimes Peter encounters range from the mundane to the bizarre, pickpockets working tourist areas and more organised criminals planning elaborate heists, street-level dealers and sophisticated fraud operations. The diversity of criminal activity teaching Peter about the many forms that law-breaking and exploitation can take, the various ways that people with bad intentions seek to profit from or harm those around them. The appearance of a new costumed villain calling himself the Sandman, a criminal whose body can transform into sand and who possesses the ability to reshape himself into various forms and to slip through barriers that would stop ordinary criminals, represents a significant escalation in the kinds of threats that Spider-Man faces, enemies whose powers rival or exceed his own, requiring new tactics and strategies beyond those that work against normal human criminals. The first encounter between Spider-Man and the Sandman occurs during a bank robbery, where Peter arrives to find the criminal literally flowing through the building's ventilation system, his granular form allowing him to access secured areas that should be impenetrable. His ability to reform into solid shape, letting him attack guards and carry stolen money in ways that seem to defy all conventional security measures. The battle that ensues when Spider-Man confronts the Sandman reveals the difficulty of fighting an opponent who can disperse and reform at will, Peter's enhanced strength proving useless against an enemy who simply flows around his punches, his webbing ineffective at restraining someone who can turn to loose sand and slip free of any bonds. The learning curve is steep, and the fight goes badly at first. Peter taking hits from massive sand-formed fists, and nearly being buried under waves of granular material that the Sandman controls with apparent ease. The criminal's taunting laughter, suggesting confidence that this new hero is outmatched and outclassed by someone with truly superhuman abilities rather than merely enhanced human capabilities. The turning point in the battle comes when Peter's scientific knowledge suggests a strategy that his spider powers alone could not provide. The recognition that sand is fundamentally silica, and that certain chemical or physical processes might affect the Sandman's granular form in ways that normal combat cannot. The use of a nearby fire hydrant to saturate the Sandman with water, turning his sand body into heavy mud that cannot flow or reform easily, gives Peter the advantage he needs to contain and defeat his enemy, though the solution is temporary, and the criminal eventually escapes before police can secure him in a facility equipped to hold someone with his unusual abilities. The victory feels incomplete and unsatisfying, Peter recognizing that he has not truly defeated the Sandman but merely delayed him, that this enemy will return, and that their future encounters will require new strategies as the criminal learns from this confrontation just as Peter is learning. The conversations that Peter has with Captain Stacy feel dangerous and thrilling in equal measure. The police officer's intelligent analysis of Spider-Man's methods and psychology coming uncomfortably close to insights that might lead to questions about Peter's own activities and knowledge. the captain's careful observation and deductive skills suggesting someone who might eventually piece together clues and connections that Peter desperately needs to keep hidden. But the discussions also provide Peter with valuable perspective on how law enforcement views his activities, what concerns police have about vigilante heroes, what kinds of coordination or cooperation might be possible if trust could be established and protocols developed, information that helps Peter understand the landscape he operates in, and the political and professional complications that his heroism creates. The respect that Peter develops for Captain Stacy during these conversations makes him more aware of how his relationship with Gwen connects him to structures of authority and official responsibility that his Spider-Man activities exist outside of and sometimes in tension with. The knowledge that his girlfriend's father is a senior police officer who thinks carefully about vigilante justice creating an irony and a complication that adds another layer to his already complex situation. The possibility that Captain Stacy might someday learn that Peter is Spider-Man, whether through investigation or accident or some crisis that forces revelation, feels both terrifying and oddly appealing. The thought of having someone with Stacy's experience and wisdom know the truth and potentially offer guidance or support, creating fantasies that Peter knows are probably unrealistic, but that nonetheless occupy his imagination during quiet moments. The end of the school year approaches with the usual mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Final exams and term papers requiring attention that Peter struggles to provide given his divided focus and limited time, his grades remaining acceptable but not excellent, the slide from his previous academic perfection now established as a pattern that teachers comment on with concern and disappointment. The conversations with his guidance counselor about college preparation and future plans feel premature and overwhelming to Peter, whose immediate concerns about maintaining his double life and protecting the city make it difficult to think seriously about applications and scholarships and long-term educational goals, though he understands intellectually that these decisions matter and will shape his future in important ways. The summer of 1964 promises to be different from the previous summer, Peter's relationship with Gwen creating possibilities for normal teenage experiences that his Spider-Man responsibilities have largely prevented him from enjoying. The prospect of beach trips and movies and simply spending time with someone he cares about, offering a vision of balance between heroism and ordinary life that appeals strongly to his desire for normalcy and connection. But the responsibilities that define his mission as Spider-Man do not pause for summer vacation or adjust to accommodate his personal desires. The criminals he fights not taking breaks for good weather or seasonal leisure. The city's need for protection continuing regardless of what Peter might prefer to be doing with his time and energy. The challenge that Peter faces as his junior year ends and summer begins is the same challenge he has been navigating since Uncle Ben's death. The question of how to balance the competing demands of his various roles and responsibilities. How to be a good nephew to May, and a good boyfriend to Gwen, and a good student preparing for his future, while also being Spider-Man and honouring the commitment he made to use his powers responsibly in service of protecting others. The answers to these questions remain elusive and situational, each day bringing new choices and new priorities that must be weighed and evaluated. Each decision creating consequences that ripple forward into a future that Peter can influence but not control. The web that Uncle Ben's words created, the connection between power and responsibility that cannot be broken or ignored, continues to bind Peter to his heroic identity and his protective mission. Ensuring that Spider-Man will continue swinging through New York streets and confronting the city's dangers for as long as Peter has the strength and the will to honour the commitment he made in those dark hours after his uncle's death. The responsibility is permanent and the burden is heavy, but Peter carries it willingly and determinedly, knowing that this is what Uncle Ben would want, what his powers demand, what the city needs, and what his own conscience requires if he is to live with himself and to honour through action the memory of the man whose final lesson was purchased with his life and whose final words echo through every choice Peter makes. With great power comes great responsibility, now and always. Binding past to present and present to future in an unbreakable chain of obligation and honor that defines who Peter Parker is and who Spider-Man must be. The summer of 1964 unfolds with a rhythm that alternates between the sweetness of ordinary teenage experience and the intensity of Spider-Man's nocturnal mission. Peter learning to navigate the competing demands of romance and heroism with increasing skill, though never with complete comfort or the elimination of guilt about the deceptions his double life requires. The days are spent largely with Gwen, their relationship deepening through shared experiences that range from visits to museums and walks through Central Park to quiet afternoons at the library studying together, or sitting on her front porch talking about everything and nothing. The easy companionship they share feeling precious and somewhat miraculous to Peter, who has spent so much of his life isolated and lonely that having someone who genuinely wants to spend time with him still seems slightly unreal. The physical dimension of their relationship develops gradually and carefully, Peter's inexperience and his general anxiety about intimacy making him cautious about moving too quickly, while Gwen's own boundaries and expectations create natural limits that both of them seem comfortable respecting. Their progression from hand-holding to kissing to slightly more adventurous embraces following a pace that feels right for both of them, even if Peter sometimes wishes things could move faster, or worries that Gwen might think him too timid or uncertain. The moments of physical closeness they share, kisses that last longer and involve more passion than that first tentative contact on her doorstep, create sensations that Peter's enhanced senses amplify into experiences of almost overwhelming intensity. Every touch and taste and scent registered with superhuman precision and creating memories that he will carry with perfect clarity for the rest of his life. The challenge of maintaining boundaries with Gwen, while also honouring his commitment to truthfulness in all areas where honesty is possible, creates constant tension in their relationship. Peter wanting to share everything with her, but knowing that the one thing he cannot share, his identity as Spider-Man, creates a fundamental barrier to complete intimacy that no amount of openness in other areas can fully compensate for. The conversations they have about their families and their hopes for the future feel honest and meaningful. Peter speaking truthfully about his love for Aunt May and his grief over Uncle Ben's death, sharing genuine emotions and experiences even while omitting the crucial context that would make those experiences fully understandable. The edited version of his life he presents to Gwen being true as far as it goes, but fundamentally incomplete in ways that create guilt and discomfort. Gwen's own openness about her life and her feelings makes Peter's necessary secrecy feel even more like a betrayal. Her willingness to be vulnerable and honest about her fears and insecurities and family dynamics creating an imbalance in their relationship, where she gives more than Peter can reciprocate, where her trust is met with carefully calibrated partial truths that protect his secret, but also create distance and inequality in their emotional exchange. The conversations about her father's work as a police officer take on particular significance given Peter's activities as Spider-Man. Gwen sharing stories about the cases Captain Stacy works on, and the challenges of law enforcement in a city as large and complex as New York. Her pride in her father's dedication and integrity evident in every word she speaks. Her admiration for his commitment to justice and protecting innocent people, creating echoes and parallels with Peter's own heroic mission that neither of them can acknowledge openly. The times when Peter must cancel or cut short dates with Gwen because of Spider-Man emergencies continue to create friction and hurt feelings despite his best efforts to minimize the damage and to make his excuses seem plausible and unavoidable. Each disappointed look from Gwen or worried question about whether everything is all right adding to the accumulated weight of deception that Peter carries. The pattern of mysterious absences and vague explanations begins to create a narrative in Gwen's mind that Peter can sense but cannot directly address. Her assumption seeming to be that he is dealing with ongoing family issues or personal problems that he does not feel comfortable discussing with her. An interpretation that Peter encourages because it is less damaging than the alternatives she might imagine if she had no explanation at all for his unreliability. The guilt that Peter feels about lying to Gwen is compounded by the knowledge that his deception is not merely about protecting his secret identity, but is also about protecting her. The awareness that people close to Spider-Man might become targets for his enemies, creating a genuine concern that disclosure might put her in danger, even if she promised to keep the information confidential. The rationalization that his lies are motivated by care for her safety, rather than merely selfish desire to maintain his secret, helps Peter live with the deception, but does not eliminate the discomfort or the sense that he is betraying the trust and honesty that should characterize a genuine romantic relationship, that the foundation he is building with Gwen contains structural weaknesses that might eventually cause the entire edifice to collapse. The criminal activity that occupies Spider-Man's attention during these summer months continues to vary in scale and severity. Some nights bringing multiple interventions in relatively minor crimes, while other nights feature confrontations with dangerous criminals whose activities threaten multiple lives and require all of Peter's abilities and focus to successfully address. The rogues gallery that is beginning to form around Spider-Man, criminals who specifically target him or who have developed grudges against the masked hero based on previous encounters, creates a new category of threat that goes beyond random crime to include personal antagonism and planned revenge, enemies who study Spider-Man's methods and weaknesses, and who design their criminal activities specifically to challenge or humiliate the wall-crawler. The return of the Vulture in late June, Adrian Toombs having escaped from custody and rebuilt his electromagnetic flight harness, with improvements designed to counter the tactics Spider-Man used to defeat him in their first encounter, represents the first time that Peter faces an enemy who is specifically prepared for battle with him, who understands his abilities and has developed strategies to neutralize his advantages. The aerial combat that ensues over Manhattan's skyline is even more dangerous than their first confrontation. Toombs, having learned from their previous battle, and having equipped his harness with weapons and defences that make him a more formidable opponent, electromagnetic pulses that interfere with Peter's web shooters, and razor-sharp wing blades that force Peter to dodge with all his enhanced reflexes to avoid potentially fatal injuries. The battle ranges across the city for nearly an hour, both combatants growing tired and making mistakes as exhaustion affects their performance, the extended nature of the fight creating multiple opportunities for civilian casualties or property damage that Peter must work to prevent even while defending himself against the Vulture's attacks. The victory that Peter eventually achieves comes at significant cost. Injuries from the Vulture's wing blades leaving cuts that will take days to heal despite his enhanced recovery. The physical toll of the prolonged aerial combat leaving him exhausted and shaking, barely able to swing home after webbing Toombs for police retrieval and ensuring that the criminal's flight harness is too damaged to allow escape. The recovery from this battle requires Peter to hide more serious injuries from May than he has previously needed to conceal. Deep cuts on his arms and torso that he must tend to himself in the privacy of his bedroom, using supplies purchased from a pharmacy and trusting in his enhanced healing to close the wounds before infection can set in. The process of cleaning and bandaging his own injuries while trying to remain quiet enough not to alert May creates a surreal and lonely experience. Peter acutely aware of how isolated his heroic mission makes him. How the lack of anyone who knows his secret means that he faces these consequences entirely alone, without support or comfort or even acknowledgement of what he endures in service of protecting others. The explanation that Peter provides to Gwen for cancelling their planned date the day after the Vulture battle, claiming that he is not feeling well and needs to rest, is technically true even if it omits the crucial context of why he is unwell. The half-truth feeling less dishonest than outright fabrication, but still contributing to the pattern of deception that defines their relationship. Gwen's concern and her offer to come over with soup or medicine creates warmth in Peter's chest, even as it intensifies his guilt. her kindness and care making him wish desperately that he could tell her the truth, that he could share the burden of his secret and receive the comfort and support that her love would provide if she knew what he actually endures and why he sometimes cannot be the reliable boyfriend she deserves. The photographs that Peter manages to capture of his battle with the Vulture, despite the difficulty of setting up cameras while engaged in life-or-death aerial combat, produce some of his most dramatic and valuable work. Images that the Daily Bugle features prominently and that earn Peter payments substantial enough to ease household finances for several months. The irony of profiting from documentation of his own injuries and risks is not lost on Peter. The transaction feeling increasingly strange and morally complicated, even as the money serves genuine good purposes in supporting May and allowing Peter to contribute to their household in ways that ease her burden and demonstrate his growing maturity and responsibility. Jameson's editorial response to the Vulture battle manages to be even more twisted and paranoid than usual. The publisher suggesting that Spider-Man and the Vulture might be working together in some elaborate scheme, that their battles might be staged to generate publicity and maintain Spider-Man's heroic reputation, that the whole spectacle of costumed heroes and villains represents some kind of fraud being perpetrated on the innocent citizens of New York. The accusations are so absurd and so divorced from reality that Peter reads them with more amusement than anger. The sheer creativity of Jameson's conspiracy theories becoming almost impressive in their elaborateness and their determination to find sinister explanations for straightforward heroism. The relationship between Peter and Captain Stacy continues to develop as Peter spends more time at Gwen's house. The police captain's thoughtful questions and observations about Spider-Man creating conversations that feel both dangerous and valuable, opportunities to understand how law enforcement thinks about vigilante justice, while also risking saying something that might reveal knowledge or perspective that Peter Parker should not possess. The captain's analysis of Spider-Man's methods and motivations demonstrates impressive insight, his professional experience allowing him to deduce aspects of the hero's psychology and decision-making processes that come uncomfortably close to accurate. Observations about Spider-Man seeming to be driven by guilt or personal loss, rather than mere altruism, creating moments when Peter must carefully control his expression and his responses to avoid revealing how accurately Captain Stacy has diagnosed the situation. The respect and even affection that Peter develops for Gwen's father makes the deception involved in his double life feel even more complicated and burdensome. The knowledge that Captain Stacy is a good man who deserves honesty, but who cannot be trusted with Peter's secret, creating another source of guilt and isolation. The fantasy that occasionally occupies Peter's imagination, scenarios where he reveals his identity to Captain Stacy and receives understanding and support rather than judgment or attempts to regulate his activities, provides temporary comfort but also highlights how lonely his situation is, how desperately he wants someone to know the truth and to acknowledge what he sacrifices and endures in service of his heroic mission. The summer also brings increased attention from May about Peter's various injuries and his frequent tiredness, her maternal concern sharpening as she notices bruises and cuts that Peter's explanations attribute to clumsiness or accidents at school, or while working on photography assignments. The worry in her eyes when she asks whether everything is truly all right, whether Peter is getting into fights or experiencing problems that he needs help addressing, creates heartache that Peter must hide behind reassuring smiles and gentle dismissals of her concerns, his lies to May feeling like the worst of all his deceptions, because she loves him unconditionally and deserves better than the carefully constructed fiction he presents to her about his life and activities. The question of college and future planning becomes more pressing as summer progresses and Peter's senior year approaches. The awareness that he will need to make decisions about applications and potential schools, creating anxiety about how his Spider-Man responsibilities will affect his options and his ability to pursue higher education. The assumption that has always guided Peter's thinking about his future. The expectation that he would attend a prestigious university and study science, in preparation for a career as a researcher or professor, now seems complicated by the reality of his double life. The uncertainty about whether he could maintain his heroic mission while also meeting the demands of rigorous academic programs at schools that might be far from New York and the city he has committed himself to protecting. The conversations about college with May and with Gwen reveal how different their expectations and assumptions are from Peter's actual situation. May imagining that Peter will attend the best school that accepts him, and that financial aid and scholarships will make possible. Gwen talking enthusiastically about the possibility of them attending the same university and continuing their relationship through college. Both of them operating with incomplete information about the factors that will actually drive Peter's decisions, and that might make their hopes and plans impossible to realize. Peter's inability to be honest about why certain schools or locations might not work for him, why staying in New York might be necessary regardless of what opportunities exist elsewhere, creates another layer of deception and another source of potential future conflict when decisions must be made and explanations provided. The approach of Peter's 17th birthday in August brings reflections on how much has changed in the year since his 16th birthday. The growth and development he has experienced both as Peter Parker and as Spider-Man, creating a sense of progress and maturation, even as core challenges and burdens remain unresolved and perhaps unresolvable. The celebration that May plans is modest but warm, a small gathering that includes Gwen and her father, the mixing of Peter's family and romantic lives creating a domestic tableau that feels both comfortable and slightly surreal. The normalcy of the birthday dinner, and the conversation about Peter's plans for senior year contrasting sharply with the secret reality of his nocturnal activities and the injuries he is still healing from his most recent confrontation with criminals. The gift that Gwen gives Peter, a watch that she saved up to purchase from her own earnings from a summer job, touches him deeply both for its practical utility and for what it represents about her feelings and her commitment to their relationship. The thoughtfulness of choosing something that Peter can use regularly and that will remind him of her every time he checks the time, creating emotional resonance beyond the object's monetary value. The moment when Peter thanks her with a kiss in front of May and Captain Stacy, public acknowledgement of their relationship in the presence of their families, feels significant and affirming, a statement that what they share is real and valuable and worth recognizing openly. Even if the foundation of that relationship contains secrets and deceptions that Peter wishes he could eliminate but knows he cannot. The summer ends with Peter feeling both grateful for the happiness and connection he has experienced with Gwen and anxious about the complications that his double life continues to create. The approaching senior year representing both opportunity for normal teenage experiences and challenges related to maintaining his heroic mission while meeting academic and social obligations. The balance he has achieved between his various roles and responsibilities feels precarious and unsustainable. The sense that something must eventually give or break, creating low-level anxiety that accompanies even his happiest moments. The awareness that he cannot continue indefinitely juggling competing demands without consequences or revelations that will force changes he may not be prepared to handle. But for now, in these final days of summer before school resumes, Peter allows himself to simply be a teenage boy in love, to hold Gwen's hand and to talk about the future with hope rather than anxiety, to imagine possibilities that his responsibilities might make impossible, but that feel real and achievable in this moment of suspended time. The weight of Uncle Ben's words about power and responsibility remains ever present, the commitment to being Spider-Man undiminished and unwavering. But Peter has learned that responsibility extends to more than heroism, that he owes something to himself and to the people who love him, that the balance between sacrifice and joy must allow room for both if he is to remain human and whole, rather than being consumed entirely by the mission that defines so much of who he has become. The web that connects all the aspects of Peter's life, the strands linking nephew to aunt, boyfriend to girlfriend, student to teachers, hero to city, grows more complex and more beautiful with each passing day. each new connection adding strength and meaning even as it also adds weight and obligation. The boy who was bitten by a radioactive spider continues his transformation into the man he will become, shaped by love and loss, by power and responsibility, by the daily choices to honour Uncle Ben's memory through action, rather than merely words, to be the hero that his failure taught him he must be while also being the person that his heart and his relationships call him to remain. And so, we arrive at the end of our journey together, though the story of Spider-Man continues endlessly forward. Spinning through time and space like the webs that carry him through the city night, let yourself rest now with the knowledge that you have witnessed something profound and timeless, the transformation of a boy into a hero, the alchemy of grief into purpose, the eternal truth that our greatest powers are nothing without the responsibility to use them wisely, and the love that guides our choices and gives meaning to our sacrifices. Peter Parker's story is everyone's story. The universal journey of learning through loss, of discovering that we're all connected in webs of obligation and care, that the power we possess, whether great or small, creates responsibilities we cannot escape and should not wish to avoid. Uncle Ben's final words echo not just through Peter's life but through all our lives, reminding us that capability creates duty, that those who can help are called to help, that the measure of our character is found in how we use whatever gifts we have been given. Let this story settle into your dreams now, true believer. Let the lessons of power and responsibility, of love and loss, of heroism both extraordinary and ordinary, drift through your sleeping mind like Spider-Man swinging through the peaceful darkness. You're safe, you're valued, and tomorrow brings new opportunities to honour the best parts of yourself. To be responsible with whatever power you possess. To remember that with great power comes great responsibility, now and always. Rest well and dream of webs that connect rather than trap, of strength used wisely, and of love that endures even loss. Sleep peacefully, knowing the city is protected, the hero watches, and Uncle Ben's words live on forever.